People who fought their bullies back, what were the consequences? Was a scrawny little kid in high school, into computers and D&D, and socially awkward, so I was prime real estate for bullying. From about 4th grade until 10th grade I was the target of it. I had 3 primary antagonists, one of whom rode the bus with me. I did my best to ignore him if I was shoved or heckled. Then one day he shoved me down, and I got back up, and he stood over me. "What are you gonna do?" I stood up, then jumped up and socked him right on the bottom of his jaw, and the sound of his teeth clacking together was perfect. He took a few steps back to regain his balance, and just stood there with a very confused look, and a bit of blood from what I assume was a cut tongue. He awkwardly turned away and said nothing. The next day his buddies stopped me in the hallway. Their primary leader shoved me against a wall and hit me with one of the hardest punches I had ever received right into the face. Bloodied and a fair bit angry, I kicked him in the nuts, kicked him in the face when he doubled over, and while he was on his back on the floor, I swung my book bag full of books as hard as I could over my head and down onto his face. He didn't move after that. His other buddy and I went into fist blows and more fist blows until we could get pulled apart. I think I socked my favorite teacher in the melee. The guy I whacked the day before was noticeably absent from the scuffle and told his buddies I'll fight if provoked now. I don't think they believed him. Well, I did. I unloaded many years of bottled up anger onto them in a moment of absolute rage. I had a concussion from being kicked in the head, 2 swollen black eyes, bloody knuckles, and various other small cuts and bruises. And so did they. I was left alone after that. I became friends with 2 of them over the next few years. Backpack receptacle and I never did edit. The consequence for the action of hallway B was a week of in-school suspension and a call to my parents. I suppose the consequence of clattering clanky teeth in the jaw was the fight the following day. In high school I caught a lot of shit from this one guy. He was bigger than me. Not much, mind you. But in his mind he was towering over me. He would belittle me verbally, push me, knock books out of my hand, trip me on the stairs, etc. Our sophomore year I had enough. It was the first week of school and he gave me a flat tire as I was walking down the hallway, in a crowded hallway intersection full of freshly minted freshmen trying to find their new classes. I didn't have a plan. I just reacted. I yelled, "Holy shit, Joe had an accident. Hey everybody, clear the way. Joe needs to get to the nurse's office. Come on everybody, this isn't a joke. This guy needs to get changed before his next class." Dude froze in stunned horror as the hallway noise stopped and people began to make an opening for him to move through. I'm guessing out of shock, he just sort of walked through the opening. No denial, no rage, just sort of stunned silence. That was enough to establish the rumor that Big Joe shit his pants. The rumor evolved over time that he wore diapers, that it was a result of a football injury, etc. No one made fun of him, mind you. It was a smallish school. Our graduating class was around 200 students. And while gay was still a regular insult, unless, of course, you actually were gay, in which case, whatever, you do you. Medical conditions were not mocked. But occasionally you'd hear whispers about it, particularly whenever Big Joe would try to do something big and bad. He left me, and most others, that he was bullying, alone after that. Settled him right down like neutering dog. Ran into him after graduation, and, like most people I went to high school with, just acted like we were long lost friends catching up. I was bullied physically and emotionally on and off by one guy who would egg on everyone else in the class to join in. It was a brutal time in my life. I enrolled in karate, but still lacked confidence to do anything about it. I'm a really gentle person, so causing harm to someone really takes purposeful effort on my part. One day after a few months of karate he decided to start that shit up again. He started pushing me around and taunting me. He had no idea I had been taking karate, mostly because I didn't have anyone to talk to in those days. I just kept walking away, and he'd get back in my face about it. The part that hurt was a childhood friend happened to be nearby and watching this. We weren't friends anymore, but he'd never joined in the class-wide taunting. He had a reputation to maintain too, so I respected that he just remained silent. But this day he started laughing along with the bullying. That just kind of set something off, and I went straight at the bully. I didn't use a single thing I learned in karate. Not a scrap. I pounced on him and used my body weight to topple him to the ground. While on top of him, I started screaming at the top of my lungs while punching him in the chest and stomach. I stopped when my whole body hurt from adrenaline and I realized he was crying. I ran to the bathroom and had a panic attack from hurting someone. I felt terrible even hurting this asshole. I threw up my mouth a few times. Went back to class at 10 to 15 minutes late. He wasn't bloody or bruised, but he was clearly in a fight. Since the teacher didn't give a fuck that I was being bullied, she certainly didn't give a fuck that the class D-bag got in a fight. But she didn't say a word about me being late. She didn't even acknowledge me re-entering the room when she was mid-lesson. Everyone knew what happened. Nobody said anything. Nobody warmed up to me after that either. The bully didn't avoid me, but he didn't talk to me again either. In later years, when people had some more maturity, people told me they were happy I beat the shit out of him, but didn't know how the popular kids would react to it, since it wasn't a stand-up fight. The feral nature of my attack was a grey area for 11-year-olds, and they didn't really know if I should be considered a badass or a lunatic. I told him to leave me alone, or I'd smash his face in. People started treating me like I was insane and the bullying got worse. Didn't matter that he once held me out a window several stories high for sheets and giggles. Didn't matter that he stole from me and tried to sell it back, even though I saw him take it. Didn't matter that he and a couple of his friends would often put me in a trash bin and place it somewhere high, so I couldn't move unless I wanted to fall down and hurt myself. People knew this. People saw it. People didn't care. The people who were nice to me would never stand up to them because they didn't want to be left out, so they kept going to his parties, didn't do a damn thing when they saw me get threatened or humiliated or beat up. Sometimes they would even join in if the mood was right and then apologize in secret afterwards. Teachers would either punish us equally because we were both in the wrong when they found out, have a short chat with him telling him he was in the wrong, or try and comfort me by saying he was just jealous and he came from a bad place, so I should have sympathy for him. Seriously, those teachers were the worst, like they had their heads against me. They once invited my dad in to tell him I had been cheating on a test. Their proof: I had 100% right answers. He was furious with them. The fact that they didn't even consider I might have actually gotten 100% right answers. It's not even like I did poorly in school. The few times his parents were involved, nothing happened other than them telling him off once and then him getting revenge on me for snitching. But back to the question, I had no one I could really trust, and the people I thought of as friends were definitely not friends in retrospect. So one day, when he came up to me, I told him to fuck off, or I'd smash his face in, hoping it would scare him off before anything happened. I was immediately told on. The teachers ripped into me, and even the people that had been nice to me to my face started keeping away, or bullying me as well. My parents didn't know. I couldn't tell them, because all this shit made me think it was somehow my fault, and that I deserved it. My role in life was to be a punching bag, because I was weird and small. If I told them, they'd tell me to be sympathetic, I thought, though they absolutely were on my side once they found out much later. I don't trust people anymore, and I have no love for myself. I want to get better, but I don't actually care enough about myself to put in any real effort. Everything good I do for myself is just because I want the people I love to see me succeed. I just want to die, yet I don't really, because I know my immediate family would be sad. I just kind of wish I could erase my existence altogether, leaving no proof that I was ever there. Never had a single bully. I was taunted from all sides, so I never really had a focus. Mostly it was verbal, but at least once a week there would be something physically painful. Stabbing me in the shoulder or back with push pins was a favorite. I got spit on and tripped all the time. A few times I was whitewashed. This consisted of being tackled in the snow, and while you are down, the group of bullies kicks snow all over you. Mostly they just all kick you though. So in 8th grade, I was being taunted and pushed on the playground while more and more people gathered around to watch and jeer at me. The poor guy was not even a real bully that was pushing me. The real bullies were egging him on, and he tried to punch me in the face. I don't know why this time was different, but I attacked after he swung. He got a glancing blow, but my fist broke his nose on the first punch. I don't really remember much after that. I know I kept swinging. Even when he was on the ground he was a bloody mess by the time we were hauled into the principal's office. We both got 3-day suspensions, but the biggest shock was when I came back. A lot of former bullies approached me and said I had hit them during the fight. I didn't remember hitting anyone else, but they showed me bruises and told me they wouldn't be messing with me anymore. I also broke a teacher's hand while she was trying to stop the fight. She was pretty pissed. I was never bullied again. I have, through the years, come to realize that this incident and all the lead up to it shaped me into who I'm more than anything else in my childhood. I'm a better person for having been through it, but now that I have children, I will never let them experience what I did. TLDR at the end. During secondary school I got bullied here and there. I was a fat kid, so it was inevitable really. There were fat kids in my year, so the brunt of the bullying never happened to me, but there is one tale I can certainly recount. So during my later teen years we were very poor, our family lost everything, and the ensuing years left me feeling very stressful. I'm in maths class one day and this kid who I was on/off friends with is being a dick, but this is nothing new, because Brian was a dick. Brian was also bigger than me as well. Anyway, he starts chucking stuff at me, thinks he's being cute. I don't quite remember how he did it, but he knocked my glasses off my face. At that moment the only thing in my head was a vision of my mum telling me we have no money so don't break your glasses. I think the stress of everything my family had recently been through made me snap. I launched myself towards him and rammed him into the stationery cupboard. My hands tightening around his throat as I pushed my body into him. I could see his face was red and he was gasping for breath, but I couldn't stop. It didn't help that most of the class were egging me on. No one liked Brian. The substitute teacher tried to intervene, but she was a bit useless and probably didn't want to get an elbow in the face. I don't remember when, but I let go and burst into tears. I was ushered straight to the nurse's office, where I calmed down, had some tea, and helped her stuff envelopes for the next few hours. At some point myself and Brian were summoned to the vice principal's office and given a good telling off. He tried to double bluff me by saying, "What if I called your parents right now? You'd be in so much trouble." I was still pissed, so I arrogantly said, "Give them a call, I dare you." I can tell you now that my parents would be glad I stuck up for myself. I think my arrogance actually threw him. So he said to go apologize to the substitute teacher. We both went round, and as we were walking, kinda sorted it all out. We apologized and I think that was the end of it. I went home and told my mum what happened. My mum is a fiery Mediterranean woman who takes no shit from anyone. She's had a go at teachers before and made them shrink into their chair, but that's another story. Of course she said what I predicted she would. She said, "Good for you, son. I'm glad you stuck up for yourself," and gave him what for. So that was the one time I stood up to a bully, because Brian did like to bully people and won, and I pretty much got away with it too. But I really didn't like how I lost it. It scared me a lot. As an adult I can be very aggressive/assertive when I need to be, but I certainly haven't become violent with anyone. Oh, and I should say, that incident went around the school and no one messed with me after that, not even the bigger kids. TLDR, stood up to my bully by nearly choking him out, called the vice principal's bluff on my parents' reaction, and I was right. Parents backed me for standing up for myself. I never got bullied, but I did counter-bullying for friends and random other kids who were bullied. I'm a huge nerd, but I also played elite level hockey as a kid. Because hockey teams like big kids, my size and a baleful lie were usually enough to put an end to things, but sometimes it wasn't. One of the things you learn as a matter of course in competitive hockey is how to fight, including a magical strain of techniques called jerseying that use the opponent's uniform against him. The classic jerseying involves grabbing the yoke of the jersey and pulling it over the head, then inside out, effectively straitjacketing your opponent. There are other variants using the sleeves, neck, hem, etc. as well as pants, elbow pads, and so on. Jerseying is so effective that the over-the-head variant is now outlawed in competitive hockey, and all players above the youth level are required to wear fastened fight straps that connect the jersey to their pants and prevent it from being pulled over the head. Even in leagues, where they let fights run their course, if someone gets jerseyed, for instance if a fight strap breaks or wasn't fastened, the refs immediately step in. It's an extremely vulnerable position. The best part about jerseying, however, is that it is really embarrassing for the subject. There are ways to get out of it, but only if you know what you're doing. Anyone who doesn't just looks ridiculous. So whenever push came to shove with someone else's bully, I never threw a punch. I just jerseyed the little prick, and then let other people laugh at him as he flailed inside a prison of his own clothes, helpless and blind. Unless he fell down, nothing got hurt but his pride, but that was usually enough, and it meant that basically nobody gave a shit. Because I didn't do this anymore than was necessary to stop them faking with other people, I never got accused of bullying anyone. One friend's mom did bake me some cookies and wrote me a nice note edit, plurality. I was bullied relentlessly in high school. I was hit, kicked, pushed, burned. Some kid held my head down a blocked toilet whilst it filled up as he flushed it. I almost drowned. Some girl spent 6 months being my girlfriend, just for it to turn out be a cruel, orchestrated prank. I was called a nickname for all of high school and people forgot my real name. Even teachers called me the nickname, because no one called me by my given name. I almost died from a couple of situations. It was just all the time. What was the breaking point? In a business class there was one guy who sat next to me compulsively to annoy me. He pushed me, turned off the computer, so I'd lose all the work I'd done, and he kept childishly calling me gay. One afternoon, I snapped. I picked up my chair and began to smack him with it. I didn't use restraint. I hit him until he was unconscious. I hit him until he was bleeding. I used my anger at every bully, every teacher that ever wronged me, on him at that moment. No one stopped me because they knew who I was and what everyone did. I wasn't even expelled because all of the teachers knew how badly I was being abused. They probably knew it was a long time coming. I received no consequences for my actions because I had literally nothing to lose. I received a week's suspension for my actions. There was even an assembly for my entire school year whilst I was off, taking about what happened and how I wasn't going to be punished for it. I'd attempted suicide before. What else could they do? I basically became my school's literal symbol of everybody has limits. That week was the most free I'd ever felt. There wasn't a single person who looked at me the same afterwards. Kid bothered me from freshman year all the way to senior year. I just never really fought back. It was mostly just words and the occasional physical move, bumping into me or throwing something, but it was a little easy to avoid. The hardest one was art class, where everyone sat on the same side of the desk, but this kid sat on the other side, right behind me, making it super hard to get out of my chair, and bumping into me, sometimes causing me to mess up on my project. The art teacher once said he would like to give me some award for how calm I was when dealing with it all. But then, one day after lunch, going up the stairs, he looked back, saw me, slowed down and got right in front of me, and stopped. I tried to get around. He moved to block me, and most other people going up. So I simply hit him in the back, quickly with the palm of my hand, and then told him to move it. He stepped off to the side and I continued on to class. The first bit of worry I had was when someone in the class asked if I really hit him, and the teacher was surprised. All she could say was good job. The more serious moment was after school that same day. I was walking home and noticed a can slow down on the street next to me. Normally it's people I know, so it wasn't bad, till the guy in the driver's seat asked if I was the one that hit his boy. Calmly, yes. Why? Why did you hit him? Because he wouldn't move and was blocking students from going up the stairs. Well, he has a hard time going upstairs. You shouldn't hit someone that is injured. Okay, I'm gonna notify the principal and he will deal with you, probably even suspend you. Okay, and then I moved on. Nothing ever came of it, but it just felt nice that after years of torment, I got that one good hit in and nothing came of it. We'll call him Mac. Mac was an arrogant jock type dude. Played on the football team. Privileged home life from what everyone could tell. His bullying actions were always a show in front of his friends. He'd build himself up by putting others down, and was extremely easy to embarrass because of this. I realized at the time that he acted the way he did because of some sort of inferiority complex. In retrospect, it actually makes me feel a little sorry for him. But we are all responsible for our own actions. I'm a short guy, 5 feet 3 inches. Being short is something that a lot of guys are insecure about. Some people get a Napoleon complex because of it. Some people get deep into a self-loathing mindset about it. I like to think I've found a good middle ground. I don't let it define me as a person. Height isn't something I notice about people, nor that I actively think about unless it's brought up. But being a short person is something that people notice about you, and because so many people are insecure about it, it's something that kids find easy to weaponize against you. So it's something that helped me grow thick skin and not put up with people's shit through school. That said, I'm also very easy to get along with. Like most people, if you show me respect, I'll show you respect. Mac and I never saw eye to eye because his arrogance and bullying was always at odds with my unwillingness to deal with his shit. For the most part, he left me alone because I wasn't an easy target. My two best friends at the time were a guy who was going through some complications from Crohn's disease and a girl who was fairly well liked throughout the school but was a little emotionally volatile. We were all sitting in lunch one day, just talking about whatever when Mac walked in, flipping a few chairs, and just making a spectacle of himself. He sat with his group of friends for a little while, all of whom were decent guys, and well liked by most of the school. Then, for whatever reason Mac got up, and walked over to my buddy with Crohn's, and made some threat about punching him in the stomach, which, I'm assuming, would have exacerbated the problems that he'd already been in and out of the hospital for throughout most of the year. Our other friend said something to defend him, and Mac made a grotesque sexual threat before calling her a dirty cunt. She got a little flustered at this point and didn't know what to say. He'd been doing shit like this all year. I just sort of made eye contact with Mac as he walked away. I mulled over my options for my remaining 2 periods and decided to have a talk with him at his locker as people were clearing out for the day. As I approached Mac, he was talking with his girlfriend and a few of his other buddies. So, he made some dick-headed gesture toward me. He either gave me the finger or made some comment about a midget. I don't remember. What I do remember though, is that this changed my conversation from a hey, man kind of talk, to more of an alright, asshole sort of discussion. I essentially told him to cut his shit, and that nobody is impressed by his half-assed displays of machoism. His response to this was to puff out his chest and say, "And what the fuck are you gonna do about it?" I closed the gap between us, looked him in the eye, and said, "I will beat you into the dust in front of all of your friends. Then, I will pick you up and carry your bloody ass through these halls as my little trophy beach. So either drop your tough guy act with your puffed out chest, or throw a punch and show me you're serious." He just sort of deflated after that and looked away from me. So I said alright and walked away. This whole scenario was admittedly just me calling his bluff. He'd never actually been in any kind of situation like that off of the football field. I'd been skateboarding my entire life. He was physically a bigger person than me, but I could take a hit, and he knew it. So I banked on the fact that he wouldn't risk it in front of his friends. Thankfully I was right, because while I'm sure I could have put up a fight, he absolutely had the physical advantage. So neither one of us would have really walked away a winner. I can't say for sure what it was that did it. Maybe I just embarrassed him enough in front of his friends. Maybe my confidence in that situation actually scared him. Or maybe he actually started to gain a little respect for me. Whatever it was that did it, he stopped directing his overt displays of superiority at people after this little encounter. Instead he started doing things like making a display of drinking vodka at school to seem edgy and cool. Obviously his showmanship got him caught doing stupid things, but that's not the point. The point is that he was still a douchebag. He just stopped being a bully. When I was in high school I got bullied quite a lot. Looking back it's no surprise, I was the stereotype of the guy you'd expect to get bullied. Skinny nerd who was very shy and really focused on his schoolwork. During my maths class, I think I might have been 14 to 16 during this time, my teacher decided to move this guy who was sitting at a desk with his friend to sit next to me. Our desks were two-person desks. The teacher's intent was to move him away from his friend, to stop him messing around during class and focus on his work, so she put him next to me, the guy who focuses on his work. The problem is I knew this guy for several years and always knew him as a prick. He was more interested in causing trouble and didn't care what he did to others along the way. So instead of focusing on his work, he made my time in this class hell while he sat next to me. He would nudge me on the shoulder, break my pen/pencils and overall be a complete dick to me. I dreaded going to this class and was getting more frustrated by it day after day. One day I dropped my ruler under my desk. I went to pick it up, and then while doing that he as hard as he could stamped on my hand. At that point I lost all control. In the middle of class, looking him dead in the eye, I punched him 3 times straight in the face. I don't know why I did it 3 times. All I know is I was pissed and I broke his nose. The teacher screamed at the sight of it, and I got my one and only detention and had to take classes to deal with anger. Was worth it though, as he was made to move desk and I got left alone from that day going forward. I don't know the American or British equivalents of how the school system here works, so I'll just use age. When I was 9 years old, I got transferred to a new school. Another story, also kind of big. If someone asks I'll tell. There was this kid who would bully me. It starts verbal and then turns physical if I say or do anything, even if I try to walk away or ignore him. Well, I had to go through this for 3 years because the 3 teachers I had back then were such pieces of shit who didn't care about the students. Well, I genuinely liked my teacher I had 4 years after the bullying started. He was kind, fair, he would make jokes and lessons were actually fun. In one of the many breaks we had that year, we were playing outside. I was playing with a few friends. Then the bully suddenly joined the group and started playing with us. Nothing bad was happening for a while until like 5 minutes before the break ends and we go back to class. The bully started bullying me again, calling me names and stuff, making fun of my height. I guess he was bored or something. Well, I was getting very sick of this because my life back then, like home, wasn't exactly very good too. He called me a rat and I called him a disappointment that nobody likes, but only plays and talks with because they feel bad for him. I don't know. I felt mean. Okay. He suddenly like gave me a kick that hit my right hip. I grabbed his leg and was pulling it so he would fall. Well, some classmates came and took us apart. When they thought it was over, the bell rang, so we had to go back to class. I was the closest to the door, so I started walking, and I would be there first if I didn't turn around, ran towards the bully, and do like one of those slide kick thingies which throws the bully's legs in the air and he fell on the ground. I played a lot of Saints Row and stuff. Okay, and by the way, that move looks like the one you can do in Dishonored 2. Now I think about it, the non-lethal non-stealth takeout. I then grabbed his head and smashed it into the ground multiple times, hit him in the balls a couple of times, and kicked the shit out of his head. It was like one of those red wide eyes where you don't care about the consequences, you just want someone dead. And all this time the group that put us apart earlier was looking like what the fuck is happening. The rest of the class was already inside and the door was locked. The bully ran crying. I mean, he was like 12 and was stomping on the door to have the teachers bring him inside. He was crying and everything. Meanwhile the group was looking at me and I was thinking, like, what the fuck did I do? The teacher knew what I did, why I did it, how I did, that the bully deserved it, and held a long speech with the bully. He was all cleaned up, but this was like 10 minutes after the event, so he was still hurting and just let me go. The parents of the bully didn't care, and my parents didn't even know I was being bullied and what happened. My teacher knew everything, so he also knew that it wasn't the best thing to be like, hey, your son almost murdered a classmate, but it's good, he was being bullied, so we kept it a secret. They later learned that I was being bullied, but they still don't know what I did. Thank God. I have some different stories, I guess. Little background knowledge. From about 4th grade to 10th grade I was overweight and even obese, so I was a victim of bullying a lot. One little asshole I dealt with was this overweight smartass during 5th grade. I don't remember much, just him being relentless about my weight. I never fought him, but I was an asshole back to him, and hell he deserved it. My most notorious bully was some kid down the road from me. Just like any other bully, all verbal, little physical. He made fun of me for everything, and I think like once or twice we fought. It didn't cure it, but I think the torment was off the gas, because he knew I stood up for myself. In 7th grade I moved from that area, and it helped me for sure, but I had some fair shares of bullying, and some bullies in my new area. One of them was this kid named Trenton who was relentless as well in any area of my life. I kind of hated him for a while, but when I started to lose weight, and be more social, we became friends. Now we are both college freshmen and we are best friends. Crazy how life works. In the end, I don't really care about the bullying back then. I was just an idiot kid surrounded by other idiot kids. However, I've noticed two things. 1. I'm so harsh on myself in every way. Even after I lost weight, I thought I was fat and hated my body, and I still do. 2. I've turned into an asshole more and more. I try my best not to, but it just happens. Bullying and life has taught me that to survive in the world, you need to be strong, upfront, and mean. I don't go out of my way to be an asshole. I just be an asshole when I need to protect myself. This one fat butch beach used to call me names like ho and ho. I think it was because I have a large chest, username is a joke by the way, and dressed provocatively to show off my figure as do most HS teens. Good figures. Especially the ones over sexualized at an early age due to sexual abuse at home. Anyways, we also shared a female friend. When that friend was mad at me, she would talk shit about me to other girl. This of course gave excuse to the butch fat beach to bully me more. Most any girl who has ever been to HS probably knows the exact dynamics I'm talking about here. Fat butch bully beach never said stuff directly to me. It was either under her breath, via this other friend, or just loud enough, while stage whispering to her own posse, so I could hear it, but technically not meant for me. One day we were both alone in hallway. She came from other direction singing some rap song about that hoe, and that beach doing this and that. I yelled at her like straight out of Taxi Driver, "Are you talking to me?" I even motioned to myself, and shook my head both so very not me. No idea where it came from. Just pent up frustration I guess, because this was going on for over 2 years. In response, she mumbled some low grade insult in her best fake ghetto white girl accent and kept walking. After art class, yes, it happened during my advanced portfolio art class and I even remember what skirt and sweater I was wearing. She gathered like 5 of her friends around my locker to kick my ass. A lot of people were just standing around watching, including our said mutual friend who was friends both of us, and obs cold de-escalated sheet. I was afraid af, and she's yelling, "Who do you think you are?" and gesturing and waving fists while her friends both male and female called me names and egged her on. Then, all of a sudden, one of my best friends, a small and short athletic type who had good faith with most everyone, runs in front of me and blocks me from her, telling her calmly not to do anything. This apparently worked, or at least stalled her long enough, because teachers came and broke it up soon after. We both got spoken to by the vice principal and bully was threatening to jump me someday when I walked home, so this was very tense for me for the rest of the year. But besides me worrying about this for a few months, she never talked shit again. Ever. For the next 2 years. Not only that, she was a huge bully to others, literally and figuratively, and I gained a reputation for being semi-badass for standing up to her. A lower classman once actually asked a friend of mine, "What's it like being friends send?" Which made me feel pretty special. Edit. Spelling. Honestly, life got better almost immediately. It helped that it was a really dramatic and one-sided, one-shot knockout with people around. He was a loud, abrasive guy who people put up with because he was pretty clever about spotting and mocking the worst about people. He'd never stop talking, and he was always shouting as part of his gimmick. One day, and not really a more important day than any other day, he shouted something like he smelled BO as I walked into a room, and he just kept at it all day. Then the week. And then he started turning it into a nickname. I was a practicing pacifist at the time, and I think the lack of confrontation was emboldening him. One day, I was walking by him in the halls, and he shouted, loud enough that one of the girls I'd had a crush on turned, "Oh, hey, it's B.O." And I grabbed onto his neck and slammed my head into his chin as hard as I could. It made a sickening thud sound like a bat hitting a meat-covered coconut, and he went limp in one shot, collapsing into the ground like a rag doll. I was raised by known associates of an unpopular motorcycle gang, and a lot of my life was something of a rejection of my roots. They did what they could to make sure I didn't go down their path, and encouraged my crime-free non-violence, but they sure as hell taught me to whip a man's ass too. I aimed the front of my skull for the back of his head, and I was going to get there through his face. And I was suspended for a week. The VP in charge made it a week proportional to how much empathy I'd expressed. None. He deserved it. And then after the week was up, there was peace and quiet. Lots of it. He never really got the confidence he had back. My classwork improved. I felt more motivated to go to my other classes, and I was reportedly happier with my teachers and recreational studies. I felt great afterward. It sucked losing a week's worth of information, but it was a satisfying trade-off. To be fair, I also gained a bit of space and fear from other people who'd been my friends before that, including some good people. I think the trade-off was worth it, and I was definitely shown more respect too. I was bullied from kindergarten to grade 7. Hell, my parents moved me to another junior high at grade 5 because the bullying was that shitty. I'm female, so it was mostly social ostracism and that kind of bullshit. In grade 7, I was in homeroom minding my own business when a fellow classmate said something awful when I passed by his chair to sharpen a pencil. I don't remember what caused me to snap, but I think it was something about faking my mother. I instantly saw red and started punching the shit out of the guy's head. I was an under 4 foot, scrawny Asian girl smacking the back of the head of a tall guy. I literally lost control and didn't know I was hitting him until the third or so punch. The next day, I was sent out of the classroom to the resource room for a long time while the vice principal lectured the entire class on bullying, I assume. I never got an apology from any of the kids, except in high school, when my social circle lined up with one of the female bullies. Ridiculous. I think the after effects are that I don't trust people. It takes a while before I can call you a friend. The result is a tiny friend circle. I don't trust my parents. They were in their own world and expected me to take care of the bullying myself. And it's not so bad. Yeah, I'm a suicide attempt survivor, US, and I generally hate kids. Because kids are Lord of the Flies specials waiting to happen. Oh, and I have a sarcastic sense of humor because some people are pathetic. Edit. The funny thing is that my most mild bully is now a successful small business owner who collects Marvel/DC statues. Expensive. And the worst one is a housewife raising her husband's kids. I was only ever bullied by one person, and it went on for about a month. Gonna be a long story as I remember it all vividly, and I think the points are crucial to get across. A bit of backstory. It was during year 8 at my secondary school, so I'd be between 12 to 13, and I've always been quite tall. I was probably around 6 foot at the time, but the guy who bullied me was probably 5 feet 2 or something at the time. He was in most of my classes, and was called Matt, and was one of the dickheads every school has. Proper chavvy kinda guy who'd pick on anyone that didn't stand up for themselves to him anyway. He started bullying me. He'd call me names, hit me, hide my things, that sort of thing. But I never properly stood up for myself for a few reasons. 1. My dad always said that if I was ever excluded, that he'd send me to boarding school, and 2. Standing up for myself simply didn't feel like an option. I was scared and didn't want to get hurt, which is weird as my dad taught me how to box when I was a kid. So the bullying goes on and on. I'd bunk classes so I didn't have to face him, and would come home from school crying until one day my dad came to ask me why I was always so upset. So I told him what was going on at school and how frightened I was of this kid constantly picking on me and hurting me. My dad listened and then told me I needed to stand up for myself and fight back, as it's the only real way of stopping a bully at school, and that I wouldn't go to boarding school if I was excluded. He'd fight tooth and nail on my side as all I'd have done is stood up for myself at the end of the day, but our talk filled me with confidence that I have to stand up for myself or it'll keep happening. So I planned on confronting him the next time he bullied me, which just so happened to be the next day. It was during our last lesson of the day that he decided to pick on me. Normal stuff like accusing me of something or other that I didn't do as. We walked past each other in one of the aisles between tables. I told him to fuck off and continued walking by him when he suddenly slapped the back of my head with a ruler. In that moment I suddenly lost it and I just turned round and started punching him over and over again. He tried to fight back at first, but as I said, I was way bigger and stronger than him and also knew how to throw punches, so he didn't really do anything. Eventually he climbed over a table and ran out of the classroom whilst the teacher calmed me down and took me to the head teacher's office. After that I remember shaking and crying due to the adrenaline wearing off, but also because it felt like such a release to just hit back. My parents were called to the school. My mum was a bit embarrassed, but my dad was proud of me for standing up for myself, and like he said he would, he stood up for me to the teachers and got my point across. The school wasn't happy about fighting, but understood why I did and why a kid can't just snitch, but decided not to suspend me from school. Instead they just suspended me from lessons for 2 days, basically like a 2-day detention, whilst the other kid was suspended for a week for bullying as other kids came forward to verify my story. Matt tried telling people he beat me up, but given he had obvious marks and bruises on his face and I had none, no one believed him. Plus there were like 20 people who saw the fight. After that he was never able to properly bully people again as people saw him as a weakling. I wasn't the last person to beat him up by any means. Always stand up for yourself, no matter the consequences. Sitting back and just accepting it is the worst thing you can do. I was in a weird situation where I was bullied, but they couldn't do anything. Every bully I was naturally more powerful than. However, I'm also very gentle, so they constantly tried to see how far they could push me. Every time I got annoyed enough to do something, I got in trouble. I remember one time, this dumb as boggan kid was stabbing me with a metal ruler, so decked him. Was hilarious. He was standing in front of a pole, his head bounced off my fist into the pole. So what do the teachers do? Try to get me to do anger management. I wasn't aware punching someone stabbing you was a disproportionate reaction. So yeah, it wasn't one of those situations where I was unable to fight back cause the bullies were stronger. My high school's teachers were so worried about backlash from parents that their only policy was walk away. Because of that, anytime I stood up for myself I got in more trouble cause I was larger and stronger. So I just didn't bother. Very few were stupid enough to physically try and take me, and FK they were dumb as bricks, so who cares about the insults. Always get a chuckle of the smaller bullies reacting like those small aggressive yappy dogs when I made a sudden movement towards them. Keep up a aggressive front, but back away and lose all aggressive body language. There was this kid in grade school, a year above me. He rode the same school bus as I and we were usually the first two on it. I remember that, whenever I got on the bus, he'd demand for my lunch box and rifle through my food. Oreos were his favorite. I ended up telling my mom I don't like Oreos anymore, so that my food wouldn't be taken, but the kid would hit me whenever there weren't any Oreos. This went on for a year and I fucking hated it. Luckily though, summer vacation came, and I got into WWE. My favorite wrestlers at the time was Chris Benoit, RIP, and Goldberg. When school started again, the bullying started again. But now, he also started mocking me for having hair on my legs, calling me monkey. This went on for a while until, maybe a month after summer vacation ended, Chris Benoit became the WWE champion. This inspired me so much, I told myself I wouldn't allow myself to be bullied ever again. The next morning, when the bully tried grabbing my lunchbox, I threw it right in his face. His nose bled. This made him angry though, so he grabbed my Oreos, threw the rest of my food on the school bus floor, and stepped on it. I spent the rest of the day angry, not hungry, thanks to my friends, and decided I was going to spear, tackle, the guy as he tried getting on the bus, and hold him in a crossface headlock. That's exactly what I did, until he cried and begged me to stop. The consequences of my actions? The bus driver grinned at me as I got on, and I could once again enjoy my Oreos. I still do, to this day. I had a group of bullies that would follow me around outside of classes. None of them were actually in my classes. In high school, it usually remained limited to low-level name calling and some mild shoving, but it happened almost every day, so it was definitely a huge source of frustration. One day, after about 2 years of this, I had a really shitty day and my mood was absolutely below freezing point. I was already somewhat seething from a lot of stupid shit that had piled up throughout the day, and there they were again, blocking my passage in the hallway for the last class of the day. I had reached the limits of my teenage patience, and without thinking, I lashed out at them. In retaliation, one of them knocked my glasses off, and they fell to the floor, but luckily didn't shatter. That was the last straw for me, and I dealt a single blow. You couldn't quite call it a punch, it was a thrust of my arm straight forward. The base of my hand connected with the closest bully's nose, and a fountain of blood spewed forth. Before any of us had really taken in what had just happened, the guy was standing bent over, and a waterfall of blood was rushing down his face and onto the floor, which quickly started resembling a murder scene with the amount of blood involved. At that point realization kicked in, and the rest of the bullies were ready to tear me a new one, but the commotion had attracted teachers who quickly drove us apart. Apparently, my blow had managed to break the guy's nose, which explains the blood explosion. Because of the countless people running around and through the pooled blood on the ground, the entire playground was soon covered in bloody footprints. It was like something out of a slasher movie. What happened next may surprise you. The bullies immediately swore revenge, and school punished me, but not very thoroughly, because they acknowledged that I'd been pushed over the edge first. Then the guy whose nose is broken contacted me, and I feared the worst: revenge, restitution, monetary compensation. But no, he actually apologized to me and told me they were way out of line and my reaction was deserved. He got the other guys to back off me, and they never bothered me again. My reputation as bully nosebreaker kept me safe for the rest of my years at that school. So all in all, I guess violence sometimes does solve problems, although I wouldn't exactly recommend it as a blanket catch-all solution. But yeah. Respect. Imo, you're bullied because you're an easy target. Because it's easy, and you give the reaction they want, that gives them power. Take it back, with force. Look for what they are seeking by bullying, and deprive it from them. I have freckles, glasses, red hair, and I played D&D. You can't get a better bullying target. I was being harassed by a Mexican kid and his friends in 8th grade. One day I just snapped, saw red, and went for it. I beat the other kid so bad he missed days of school. A few weeks later he came up to me for what I thought was going to be round 2. Nope, he came up to laugh and show me the bruises. I was stunned. Word got around I wasn't someone to fuck with. Eventually in high school, when my friends were getting targeted, simply being around me gave them a level of protection. I'm not saying physically attacking your bully will net results. Some won't be cool about it, but finding out what they are after will give you power. If they say something shitty about you, agree with them with confidence, then give a fictitious example of how it's true. You get the power to take the conversation to some place from fractions of assumed truth to pure fiction. It will fuck with their game. They want a reaction, good bad, just some validation. They have power, take it from them first. They'll move on, and you can have a laugh about it later how you outwitted them. I was probably an easy target in high school because I pretty much had no friends and I just stuck to my sci-fi fanfiction. My bully played himself off like he was just kidding and a fun guy, but he was always forcing me to basically cheat his way through school. After years of this, I had zero confidence with anyone, so I was especially useless around girls, and I ended up being sort of a creeper. That's actually how I did make my first real friend. He busted me checking out a girl when I thought I was being stealthy. I never knew what my friend saw in me, but he practically hounded me to get my life together. He coached me on breaking the ice with women, standing up for myself, and I even got more confident with my writing. I really had my eye on one girl in particular, and my friend came up with this harebrained scheme to get her to go to our school dance with me. Long story short, everything backfired when my bully showed his true colors and tried to sexually assault her. Between seeing her hurt, the new shot of confidence my only friend gave me, and my bully laughing in my face, I lost it. Somehow all that pent up anger came through in one shot, and I managed to knock him out. After that, everything fell into place with my girl, like it was destiny, but my friend pretty much vanished from our lives. Was raised in the ghetto in a small town in NC where I was the only white kid for a mile, then beyond that the next mile and a half. Didn't mean shit to me, because that was my home. Dealt with typical stuff but nothing too bad. Moved to Gafford High School, caught trouble from some suburban black kids who thought they were hood about it. They varied in age, but would always skip class, have drugs to sell, and in general try to be gangsters, even though they were just a tough clique. Went to the bathroom one period, and happened to walk in on 3 of them in the bathroom skipping/rolling blunt/playing rap on a laptop. Walked to the urinal, and started doing my business, then got kicked in the back of the knees and they started yelling. He faked up. This is our bathroom. What you doing in here, white boy? Look at this beach. etc. Tucked my junk in my pants, turned around, and went for it. Tackled/speared the closest one into the sink and his head started bleeding from a gash. Got lucky and squeezed out from the other 2 trying to throw haymakers, and ran out of the bathroom. Squared up once they chased, and just backpedaled for 2 minutes, while other students and teachers noticed, and broke it up. Wasn't a big deal until the resource officer brought out the first guy bleeding like a stuck pig, then shit got crazy. 2 guys affiliated with their gang went after me, while I was being escorted to the office. The coach escorting me pinned one against the wall, and I fought the other, while another new crowd of students gathered, ended up choking him out. The coach went to stop me, and the kid took the chance to attack me, when my banged drumline ghetto friends picked him up, blocked the coach, and beat the living shit out of him. Had a couple of police come, and they locked down the school for the rest of 4th period. Got 1 day in school suspension, the other 5 got expelled, my bangmates got 3 days out of school. My bully was my older brother. I didn't fight back, until I was in my mid-20s. It was Christmas Eve and he started a fight over some trivial nonsense and I snapped a bit. Long story short, he wound up in the hospital. Nothing serious, he was just angry, and wanted to punish me, and tried to press charges. The cops convinced him not to, and I drove down to Boston, to visit my girlfriend at her college. Everyone had my back, including his then wife. Everyone agreed he acted like a child, and finally got what he had coming for a long time. My dad was proud of me, but since he had grown up learning he could do no wrong, that he could beat the shit out of me, and have no consequences, he didn't know how to handle the situation. So he disappeared. Literally. He took his wife and kids, and never spoke to my family, including my grandparents, aunts/uncles, cousins, who had nothing to do with it. I felt so guilty, because my grandmother is now in her mid-80s, and has still yet to meet her only great-grandchildren. He eventually got divorced. He'll say she was crazy, but they were both unstable, and he had a pill addiction. He was also violent, and abused his wife, so they're better off separated. When he needed money for lawyers, he decided to come back by means of faking a suicide attempt to garner sympathy. This was bullshit, by the way, because he had bullied me so badly that I attempted suicide when I was only 12. I was recently diagnosed with PTSD and have been taking medication for major depressive disorder for 18 years now, but he made a joke of mental illness just to get some cash. I still don't talk to him. My family keeps him at arm's reach. Everyone now knows how much of a monster he is, and takes everything he says, and does with a grain of salt. After the fight, my life turned around. I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I'd never be bullied or hurt again. I went back to college, went to grad school, moved halfway across the country and work as a data scientist. Life is better for me, now that he's out of it. The hardest part of it all is that I grew up in an Italian/Irish family, where we were taught that family is forever. It's been tough learning that family doesn't have to mean friends. That I have the choice of who can be in my life and I can choose to leave people out. Spent about 6 months being bullied by this guy when I was about 13. He took my school lunch off me a few times, took my pocket money, or sometimes he'd casually walk by me and punch me on the shoulder and laugh about it, stuff like that. I took it quietly for months. One day, I arrived in the classroom 5 minutes before class was to begin. The bully was there along with his friend. We were the only ones in the classroom. They were talking about monkeys and I walked by and said something along the lines of, "Nah, you're a monkey." He came right up to me, stuck his chest out, and started provoking me. He was a bit on the chubby side and got into fights frequently. I was a skinny kid and was no good at fighting. I punched him in the chest 3 or 4 times to no effect. He went for my face and knocked me clean out with one punch. We both got sent home for the day. My parents were furious at me. The teacher called up my parents. She didn't see me provoking the guy and fully defended me for my reputation for being a good kid, while the other guy got kicked out of 2 schools already. So the next day me and Mr. Bully were sent to the principal's office. There were these 2 benches right by the principal's door, in a corridor facing each other. We waited for the principal to call us in for about 20 minutes or so. So there we were, each sitting on a bench and looking at each other in silence. I felt confident because everyone was backing me up, even though I was the one to start the fight. The bully looked at me and asked me, "So, what are we gonna do?" And I replied with, "I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be fine and you're screwed." The bully breaks down in tears, to my surprise. Cried about getting kicked out of yet another school and having no friends. I thought, this is not what I expected. The principal opens the door, calls us into his office with this tired, long day kind of look on his face. As I sat next to the bully across the principal's desk, the principal takes a long sigh and says, "Okay, so what am I going to do with you two?" I felt sorry for the bully, so I stepped up and said, "Look, we have talked it out, and we're both very sorry, and we promise it won't happen again." The principal was pleasantly surprised and decided to let us both go without consequences. After that, the bully treated me like I was his best friend. We got on pretty well for years after that. Opened a police case, got a restraining order, and took him to court. The magistrate was happy to allow me to press charges if I wanted to, and explained in depth to the scumbag what he could be charged with, and he and his father quickly calmed down. They had this evidence that they tried to use to make me look bad, and they got shut down pretty quick when they started trying to use it. I eventually chose to mediate instead of choosing the charges, only because my lawyer's fees for a drawn-out case that I would have won would have cost too much for me to allow my parents to pay. They had debts then that I was more concerned about. Mediation was more like sit down and tell me what I want to hear, or I'm going back in there and pressing charges, and boy did it work. He was sweet as honey after that day and even hugged me for not ruining his life. I just laughed at the dumb as because he had no idea that this could even have happened. He offered me protection from his asshole friends whom I just ignored because they knew that I was now not to be faked with from there on. I told him to politely fuck off with his protection and stay far the fuck away from me. That guy was an asshole and I missed a fuck ton of school stressing over him being there, as well as lost most of my high school years because of the whole saga. It kinda all stuck to me in more ways than one, but luckily there were good people and good friends who seemingly ignored everything. The school was useless though throughout it all, and allowed him to be a cunt for months. Only when I introduced the law to these facts did all the shit actually come to an end. You can tell I still have a bit of anger inside about it all, and rightfully so. Nobody at that school knows or understands what I went through. I still think about it today and get chills when I see the prick. I still keep copies of all my legal documents as a memento years after it all, and I relish in the fact that he was shit scared of the possibility of charges. If he ever comes back for a visit, then all I have to do is drive 5 minutes up the road to my nearest courthouse and boom, instant arrest warrant. He still has to avoid all communication with me, which is a blessing I could have only dreamed of a couple years ago. I didn't fight her, but I stood up to her. We were in 6th grade, and she had bullied me from 2nd grade on. She got away with it because her mother was a teacher in the school we attended, and all of the teachers and playground monitors just looked the other way. One day, she called me horrible names and punched me in the stomach as we were lining up for lunch. Right in front of the monitor, and she did nothing. Literally turned her back. I felt incredibly helpless and worthless at that moment. We went into the lunchroom and got our lunches. I just cried the whole time, thinking that I was a worthless piece of shit and no one would ever help me because I must have deserved this. One girl at the table told me, "Don't blow your nose at the table. That's disgusting. You're gross. We are trying to eat our lunches here." I couldn't eat. As we were filing back out to the classroom, one of the lunch monitors pulled us both aside and directed us to the principal's office. The principal told us that we were in trouble for fighting. I told the principal that I wasn't fighting. I didn't start anything, and I didn't even hit her back. She was fighting, not me. The principal then separated us. I sat alone in a room for quite a long time, over an hour, I'm sure. Finally the principal came in the room with the bully. Bully apologized. "I'm so sorry, I just have a lot on my mind, and I'm stressed out." Crocodile tears welled up in her eyes. That pissed me off. Suddenly, I was angry. I was prompted to accept her apology. I refused. "No, you don't mean it, and you are just going to do it again and again. I don't accept your apology." The principal tried a couple more times to get me to accept the bully's fake apology, but I held my ground. Then I was told that if I did not, I would have to stay in the office the rest of the day. I told the principal that I shouldn't be punished for refusing to accept a fake apology and that I hadn't even started this whole thing she did. The bully was allowed to go back to class and I sat the rest of the day in the principal's office. The principal drove me home after school because I ended up missing the bus. This was over 35 years ago. The next day at school, I returned to my classroom. The bully acted like nothing had ever happened. Nothing changed until the next school year, when she moved away. However, I finally realized that I didn't have to take it. My mother was a high-strung woman, always complaining about bills and how my father should have picked a better line of work. She transferred these worries to my 6-year-old self, and I was unsure of what she was talking about most of the time. This continued for about a year until one day she strapped me into my car seat and sat down in front of me, started the car, yelled that it was all my fault, and tied a plastic bag over her mouth and nose. My father was very distraught when he arrived home, finding me in the car with my suffocated mother, but he was thankful that my mother had failed to take my life as well, because she had poorly tied the rubber hose over the exhaust pipe. While it would have traumatized most children to see their own mother die in front of them, I knew that she did it because she was selfish and abandoned me and my father. My father soon quit his job as a freelance writer and used his degree to get a job as a high school teacher. Not a great profession, but more steady and better paying. He didn't blame me for my mother's suicide, and he actually seemed happier and took more of an interest in my life. We spent many fond hours playing Battlefront on my Xbox and fishing in the land of 10,000 lakes. When I was 10, the PTSD began. I would have flashbacks of my mother gasping heavily into that plastic bag and then her eyes rolling back into her head. The first flashback happened in my 6th grade history class when my teacher showed us a film about the Holocaust and gas chambers. That all brought back my repressed memories and I ran to the bathroom to hide. I was found in a bathroom stall with a car and a female stick figure drawn with X'd out eyes, all of which were drawn in my own feces. My father was immediately called, and he picked me up from school within 15 minutes. He was very understanding and explained to the principal about my mother's suicide, and I was not punished at home or at school. At least not officially. From that day onwards, I was known as the Sheet Phantom. And the flashbacks didn't stop, nor did the harassment from the other students. One student in particular, Roger, was terribly cruel to me. Him and his crony Simon would mercilessly call me the Sheet Phantom and taunt me about my dead mother and how she killed herself so she wouldn't have to deal with me. This was too much for my 10-year-old self to handle, and Roger and Simon would pay. Nobody wanted to be friends with me, and my father was my only true friend. How that would soon change. The next day, I asked my dad to take me to Chipotle, and we shared what would be our last meal before the incident. When I woke up the next morning, I began consuming large amounts of X-Lax. As soon as I went to my locker, Roger and Simon approached me and began to taunt me as usual. I still remember the words that pushed me over the edge. "You autistic freak. I bet your dad wishes he had pulled out, and I bet your mother wishes she had swallowed. Oh wait, she can't. Because she is worm's food. I snapped. I pulled the diarrhea-filled plastic bags out of my locker, one in each hand, and swung them at Roger and Simon. Both bags exploded all over their faces and they scampered off to the principal's office, drenched in my cold, wet fesses to report me. The DNA tests proved that it was my fesses, but I didn't care. Everyone knew not to fuck with the sheet phantom. My father picked me up from school early again, this time clearly angry, a state in which I had never seen him before. He wouldn't even speak to me. On the way home we stopped at Menard's, and he went in, while I waited in the car, then came back 5 minutes later with a box under his arm. We finished the ride home in silence. Upon our arrival home, my father took me into the basement, and told me that this time I had to be punished. He then told me to open the box from Menard's, since my punishment was in there. Scared beyond belief, I opened the box. Inside were a pair of shiny jumper cables. Not me, but happened to my best friend right in front of me at school breakfast. We were sitting beside each other at a table in the commons going over Spanish homework before the first bell, literally just minding our own business. Out of nowhere this faking random kid just walks past us, and for no reason at all just smacks my friend in the side of the face. I noticed his head recoil in my peripheral vision, so I looked up and said, "Dude, did that guy just hit you?" The dude had just kept walking after hitting my friend. My friend jumped out of his chair, took like 4 long steps to catch the kid from behind by his collar. The kid turned around just in time to catch a wound-up punch right to the faking douchebag face, and then my friend, while still holding this kid's collar, just started faking wailing on him. He probably got 5 or 6 solid punches in before I pulled him off, because the staff had noticed what was happening and were coming to intervene. Principal tried to punish my friend, but he basically just refused to be punished for defending himself and eventually argued his way out of it. Me and that same friend who I still kick it with regularly saw that dude at a gas station a couple years ago, and he acted like they were long lost buddies. Fuck you, Dylan. Watching you get a beating for assaulting somebody for no reason is one of my favorite memories. Several instances. Early elementary school. White kid was being really racist towards me and always tried to destroy the things I worked on or played with. One day outside he gathered his friends and I gathered mine, and we had a showdown. It was no holds barred, and we used rocks, bricks, sticks. I slammed his hand down onto the rubber of a broken parking trapezoid. He had permanent damage. Was suspended and threatened with expulsion, but never was bullied again. Another instance, a college kid from church teased me a lot, even though I was an elementary school student. I lost it and jumped on him and beat his head as hard as I could. I tried to hit his eyes. No consequences, but he left me alone. Later in middle school after school, a bully was targeting my siblings. I climbed on top of an outdoor jungle gym and drop kicked him off his feet and then sat on him and punched him until he cried for mercy. No consequences. A different bully who kept making fun of my clothing. Very conservative parents. I shoved him backwards into a large bucket and then beat his ass. Got a talking to from the church counselor, but that was all. High school big dude into fighting and being a thug and stuff, always wanted to start a fight. I fought him by hanging on from behind and choking him until he tapped out. Hung on even though I was being slammed into walls. He became my friend afterwards. It was after school, so a teacher broke us up, but no meeting with the principal or anything. Time got all of mine. I didn't have to do jack shit to them. The worst one committed suicide senior year of high school because he faked up so bad he thought hella rich daddy couldn't fix it this time. Headed $10,000 worth of damage to the high school football field by doing donuts on it in his truck. Went in jail overnight. Daddy bailed him out and told him to go home while he spoke to the cops. Cut him a deal to drop charges if the damages were paid. By the time dad got home he'd killed himself because he didn't want to go to jail. Not saying he deserved to die, but he did it himself and I had nothing to do with it. Just ironic he always told me to kill myself. The other was drunk 2 years ago flying at 90 miles per hour down a country road. Road turned. He didn't. killed on impact, and his beauty, also a bully, was in the passenger seat, suffered irreparable brain damage, giving him the mentality of a 3-year-old. And the mean girls, the group of girls that made my life hell, all went to a crappy college. If they got accepted at all, couldn't get in anywhere, and each weighed probably 300 pounds and looked like they're 40. All miserable. Sucks, their lives either turned bad or ended. But that's the entire roster of high school jackasses I had to deal with. Except one. He cleaned his life up actually, and is a nice guy now. Still talk to him on occasion. Edit. Wording. Wouldn't call it karma. Karma would be just giving them a bigger jackass to deal with. I'd rather call it a cruel yet ironic twist of fate. Back in sophomore year in high school, there was this chick who I'm going to call Jackrabbit. You know that kid in Bob's Burgers who wears the bunny ears? This chick wears the same ones. She had been assigned to me in a history group project, which we were doing quite well in. I was with my closest friends at school, but I also had to deal with Jackrabbit. About a day after me and Jackrabbit had a small argument over a trivial part of the project. The project itself was about genocide, and my group had chosen the Southern Sudanese genocide. I found that an important part of the project I had finished the day before and put in my backpack was missing. My teacher asks for the sheet, and in a very flaunty fashion, Jackrabbit reveals she had the paper and says I forgot it like an idiot yesterday, and she handed it back to my teacher. This would continue for a week before I finally feel like I can prove she's been stealing these papers out of my backpack and turning them in herself, trying to make me look irresponsible. Well, I talk to her in our project group chat on Google+, and I warn her to stop attempting to sabotage me, or else I'm going to report it, and there will be consequences. Now, she screenshots this and leaves out the report part, and then reports what I said to the principal, saying I was threatening to kill her. Just an FYI for the next part, I do have high functioning autism, which kind of leaves people to assume I do very drastic things. I have never purposely hurt another person that wasn't my sister fighting with me in my entire life. I wasn't the type of person to throw threats. So the principal, being the rational woman she is, decides to have me been pulled out of class the next day when I was supposed to be helping with a major part of the project on her busiest day, and have me wait around in another classroom for 3 hours, with me not being allowed to talk with threat of suspension if I did. So eventually I do make it to the principal, and she lets me know that what I did was unacceptable and she can't have such a mentally unstable person on campus. So after a lengthy argument between me and her, she suspends me for a week with the possibility of being expelled. When I came back, she then calls my mom. She doesn't answer because at this time she was teaching her swim lessons. So then she calls my dad, who was out working nearby. He answers and she lets him know he needs to pick me up and that I had threatened to kill a student online and I may be expelled. My dad, knowing that I may get mad sometime, but was not the kind of person to threaten another's life, yells at her over the phone and hangs up. She then tells me to not listen to anything my parents might tell me about my behavior and that they are flawed in their parenting skills. My dad arrives, extremely pissed, tells me to grab my stuff and go. My principal wants to talk to him. He reuses because he's already hella pissed at her, and we leave. He lets me know I'm not in as much trouble as I think I am, and that my principal is a cocksucker, and I tell him my side of the story. To sum it all up, I do get grounded for trying to talk like that to a classmate without first letting a teacher know, but my parents know I wouldn't threaten another person's life. My parents confront Jackrabbit's parents, who threaten to sue them if they demand an apology from Jackrabbit. So my parents sue the school for discrimination against a mentally disabled student. The principal saying she can't have a mentally unstable student on campus and threatening to expel me, a mostly squeaky clean student, for something said privately and wasn't even a threat. I end up leaving that school the next year and shifting to an online curriculum due to my mom not wanting to have an aneurysm from dealing with the local school district. TLDR, I called out a student for stealing my papers and trying to sabotage my learning. They warped it into a threat. My principal used my autism to justify trying to kick me out of my school. Parents don't believe her BS. I leave and Jackrabbit gets away scot-free. I've told this on Reddit before, but since it's a direct question I'll say it again. I'm Asian and I grew up in the rural south of America in the 80s and 90s. So there were no other Asians and racism was pretty rampant. Not only that, but I was a very small child, always the smallest in my grade. Plus I moved around every few years, so I changed schools a lot. And it all culminated in the fact I was fairly quiet, not very outgoing, and really just kind of weird. If kids were going to pick on someone they would pick on me. If you keep coming to teachers because kids keep picking on you, they just kind of stop caring. Some don't really care to begin with. Here's the thing though, I've never really been one to back down from confrontation. So generally things just escalated to a fight pretty quickly. When I went to a kind of ghetto school in South Carolina I got in 4 fights in my first day before I was suspended just because kids messed with me and I didn't back down. I learned that if you fought your bullies all you had to do is hurt them in the fight. You didn't have to win. Even if you lost the fight and cried, they wouldn't pick on you again. B. Bullying works by intimidating people enough that you don't actually have to risk anything. They are looking to gain status purely based on fear. By fighting back hard enough to hurt them, then you change the equation for them. They might be able to win, but they now have to pay something for that win. Nobody is going to beat you up every week if it means they get kicked in the balls every week. They'll just find the people who are afraid to fight back. As far as the administration goes, you get suspended. But that's not a big deal. My parents didn't care that much, and you get suspended 2 to 3 times because you got into a fight with the biggest kids in the school, and then nobody is going to bother to mess with you much. I thought of the suspension days as days off. This changes a bit when you get to high school, when they start arresting you for fighting. Copied first bit from a question before. Knocked out one of his teeth with a textbook in like 3rd grade, might have been 4th. Had the teacher/principal not stopped me, I might have probably killed him. He been just a constant pain in my existence. Since 1st grade he and another kid everyday constant shit talking and name calling, pushing, prodding me. Finally snapped. Didn't realize what I had done till the principal had pulled me off him. Seeing what I did when I lost control made me pretty well from that day, since short of constantly being control of my emotions, suppressing them if need be, probably why I feel I can hide my depression from everyone, probably even caused it in a way. Still had name calling, but I laughed at it, and those that still called me names made jokes at my expense. Learned to not push it. As far as school punishment, I had to sit in the principal's office during recess for a few weeks, but it wasn't really a punishment as we just had dessert from lunch or just talked some. I don't remember how my parents reacted, doubt they were even told. Kid left her before the year was up. After the incident he was picked on some by the other kids as a person half his size had beat him up so thoroughly. A few years later, in probably 8th grade, might have been 7th, the kid was picking on a special kid. He wasn't really all there most of the time, he seemed normal, but what of these I don't know, fits I guess, and the kid always picked on him for it. I told him to stop picking on the kid, and then he started directing it towards me. I told him to stop, that he wouldn't like how it would end. Even some of my friends told him to leave me alone, but he didn't. One day at lunch he poured my milk out all over my lunch I had just got. I jumped up and basically strangled him. I ran off after I realized what I'd done, down to the basketball court and sat alone for a while till a teacher found me. Hated myself for losing control of myself like that. Spent several days with after school detention for it and grounded for a week at home. My own self-punishment was more severe than anyone would probably know, and in hindsight, now that I think about, might have been the first time I felt my new miserable self. I didn't physically fight him back, being that I was a 130-pound girl and he was a 165 lb 170-pound wrestler for our high school's team. He would do the usual picking on, kicking things out of my hands, and he would also put his crotch in my face or take my stuff and put it in his pants like my bananas. Finally, one day in math class, he and my ex-boyfriend, who sat on either side of me, were passing notes for their upcoming French exam, writing things on their arms and such, and he told me to keep passing the notes back and forth. I refused. He kicked me in the thigh, and I started to cry in class because it freaking hurt, dude. I went home and eventually told my mom what had happened, and she was livid. She and I the very next morning went to the police to report this kid, talking about how he had been tormenting me and whatnot. The cop said he couldn't do anything, since it was on school property and my mom was pissed. Then we went to school and asked to immediately see one of the vice principals. There were two, a lady and a man. We met with the lady and I told her everything. She asked for names of other kids who had seen him tormenting me and pulled them into the office immediately. After hearing what they had to say, they pulled the bully into the office and laid it into him. He got suspended and his parents were so pissed at him. Then later that day, even though I didn't go into class, I went to golf practice. While on like the 6th hole my phone started blowing up. This guy was in my friend group that consisted mostly of guys, and they were all mad at me saying I faked this dude over and what a bitch I was and that I was overreacting. Even a couple days later I was at lunch with this girl who was the guy's ex, and she was saying, man, I really hope this doesn't go on his permanent school record, cause what if he can't go into a good school? He's a good guy. I feel really bad for him. I don't know if I'd really use the term as my bully because I never felt like a victim of him or anything, but he was an antagonizer who mocked me and tried to belittle me when he thought he could get away with it anyway. He kept saying he wanted to kick my ass all the time and giving me the stink eye in class, and one day I pointed out that I walk home every day and am not exactly hiding. Big rumor goes around about a fight after school. Leaving school I notice that the amount of kids walking home at least tripled. He confronts me and starts bumping chests, shoving me, and talking shit, telling me to go ahead and hit him. He eventually reached his hand up to my throat, so I punched him in the face and then immediately blacked out because one of his friends came up, punched me in the back of the head. 5 of them beat the shit out of me while half the school watched, and no one who was supposed to have my back did a thing. Woke up being lifted up by one of them in a sleeper hold, telling the first kid to go ahead and punch me. Kid did the weakest beach punch to my chest, and I told him if he was gonna get me jumped he better stop being a pussy about it cause he'll be coming back. Got another punch from his friend and thrown to the ground, got up and started walking away, only to have another kid jump on my back and start punching me in the face from the side, but I flipped him over my back, stomped on his head, and ran. Cops were coming down the street at the same time, so the kids didn't follow me and the crowd dispersed. Consequences were a lot of pain, cuts, and bruises, and having them take the opportunity to pull their knives out and threaten to finish the job because of how I sucker punched their friend. Police took my statements but did nothing. School claimed they were going to do a few things, but redacted every single punishment and ignored my insistence that the kids had weapons on them and were threatening me with them every day. Ended up getting revenge on 3 of them over the course of 4 years. One of them drifted off into obscurity and another apologized to me, and we ended up becoming really good friends years later. When I was in 7th grade there was this kid named David who was part of the Latin Kings. Anything that happened in that school had to go through him, and people didn't fuck with him. One day in PE we were all playing around slap boxing, and he comes and challenges me to body blows, and I was like, nah man, we just messing around here, gotta get back to class before coach comes back. His friends made a circle around us, and he told me it wasn't a suggestion, so we played. This motherfucker hits me dead in my mouth, so I took a step back and was like, yo, body blows. He steps forward and I punch him in his mouth and he drops. He gets up. We both just looked at each other. He looks at his friends. He looks back at me. I stand there quietly cause I know I'm about to get jumped. He's like, 8 then I'ma get you, walks away. I was faking terrified that he would jump me on my way home or something ridiculous. The next day he comes to me and is like, yo, you faking got me man. Good shit. We became friends for the next few years. He was the coolest kid. His older brother owned the LK chapter in that area, so he had good connections in that sense. A year later him and his friends helped me out when I got jumped by a few people. We ended up going to different HS, but still kept in touch till I moved to another state in 11th grade. I hadn't spoken to him in a year, but recently found out that he committed suicide about 3 years ago, and that shit hurt my soul cause he was a good kid. He just ran with the wrong people. R.I.P. David, the bully that made middle school much safer for me. I've had to deal with 2 1A bullies in my life. One, no idea why, maybe it was some kind of hyper competitiveness, but there was a kid who would just always play dirty while doing any kind of sport or outside activity. Other people noticed he focused on me, and that kind of grew into a mutual dislike. I didn't give him a chance to become a full-blown bully. He fouled me while we were playing on a field next to a hill during school lunch, so I just straight up tackled him down said hill, let him get up, and we squared off, but were interrupted by a teacher. He never faked with me again after that, and moved about a year later. I never held much of a grudge or anything, we just didn't interact again outside of sports and he just kept his distance. Got my parents called in for roughhousing, but it wasn't a huge deal, because nobody got seriously hurt or anything too. Kid half my size decided he was going to prove he was a tough guy, and punched me in the face. It did not have the effect he was hoping, as I laughed at him. I was laughing because it didn't hurt much, but was also about to beat the shit out of the kid. But he was seen by a teacher, and I was sent to the nurse. He was sent to the office, and somehow in a way, that probably made sense at the time, but adult me can't remember. We ended up being close friends for years. I was a bad target for bullies. Was not afraid of taking a hit as a kid, and was generally sharp-tongued. The kid that punched me, and went on to become a friend though, he wasn't tough, but he was a little shit when we were younger. And every time I was out of school he'd get his ass beat, because he didn't have anyone around to protect him. He wasn't afraid of a fight either though, just didn't seem to win them very often. Also, oddly, the 2 other kids in our grade that kids were afraid of both gravitated towards me in high school. I never tried to be tough in high school or anything, but I guess having people be scared of you makes you lonely or something, because just by not being scared of them, they both got very talkative with me. Hey, were both big dudes. One was 6 feet 5 inches by sophomore year, but was basically a big teddy bear most of the time, but when pissed, was like trying to stop the juggernaut. Watched him chase a kid who tried to fuck with him, with 2 janitors hanging off him trying to stop him. The other, I suspect, had some kind of abusive upbringing. He was also tall, maybe 6 feet 2, 3 inches, thin but strong, and seemed to be more self-aware of how people looked at him, and I think kind of liked the attention. He bragged a lot about fights that I'm fairly sure never happened. He never really beat anyone at school up, but people were still scared of him. I had quite a number of bullies throughout my school career. When I was in 6th grade it was really bad. Kids would make fun of me, call me names. Heck, there was one bastard that would jump in my face and call me ugly. Usually I'd like getting to class first. Don't know why, cause I hated the whole faking place, but I did. One a shat named Javier, yep that's his name, would harass me verbally, and he noticed that I liked getting to my next hour class first, so he would intentionally get ahead of me. I know he did this intentionally cause he would constantly look back with a wide happy smirk on his face. One day I had enough, and I caught up to him a little bit, and grabbed him by the back of his shirt, specifically the collar, and pulled him back. It wasn't much, but here's where shit hits the fan. You see, this was the first year a new principal was in charge of the school, and fun fact is that he was the former vice principal's husband. His name is Mr. Russell. My god, did his sheet excuse of helping stop the bullying was horrible, cause he basically did jack shit. So you wanna know what he does when he gets word of me grabbing the back of Javier's shirt to pull him back a little? He calls the faking cops. I shit you not, he called the police, had an officer come into the office with me, and there, I did not get arrested, but the officer was there to state that it counted as assault, which is against the law, etc, the whole mumbo jumbo bullshit. Then he tells my mom that he's planning on putting the incident on my permanent record and some other kinds of bullshit that will basically make me look like a bad kid for the rest of my school career. She flipped. She knew how horrible the bullying was for me, and that they weren't doing anything about it, and now she hears that the principal, who also knew that this bullshit was constantly going on and wasn't doing anything, and most likely wasn't gonna do a damn thing either, decided that the one time I lay my hands on one of my bullies, and again it wasn't much at all, that he was basically going to do something to my records. Now that I'm thinking about it, he might have wanted to put me down as a violent kid or something. Maybe he wanted to send me to juvie over this, I don't know, and even brought in a police officer. She knew that his couldn't go on, so she pulled me out of that school. They begged her not to cause they said that they would help her, me, and stop the bullying, when she damn well knew they weren't gonna do jack shit about that, and that they only wanted me to stay for money reasons. Schools get money for every student, plus cause of the whole financial thing that just went down that year at the school. Fuck you Bubus. Heck, they knew their sorry excuse of helping me with the bullying was making me suicidal. I was 12. And yet they had the audacity to still beg her to keep me in the school. My mom then attempted to homeschool me. It didn't go well, and I failed the 6th grade. I got enrolled in a different school next school year in the 6th grade, and was much better off there. And the real kicker, if all this bullshit, Mr. Russell is still the principal there. I hope to God that fat idiot got his act together, cause he damn well almost killed me with his excuse of being principal. I moved around a lot and am a small guy, always have been. So, as you can imagine, I fought a lot of bullies. Most of them cut the shit when you make them hurt for messing with you. But there was this one guy. Let's call him Jake. Jake just loved to cause pain and didn't seem to feel pain himself, or fed on it, or thought he deserved it, or was a masochist, or whatever. Didn't matter to 12-year-old me who just wanted to get through those 3 years in peace. I'd finally had enough one day. I simply couldn't handle the daily fights or the ignorant lazy platitudes of dumb as adult females who don't or never had to put up with it. My parents were considering legal action, and I was at the end. So, I took a couple rolls of dimes to school in my pockets, and when his inevitable bullshit started I skipped the faking foreplay. I went straight to violence with this sheet bag. That first punch sent him reeling, and the look of shock at being hit so damned hard he certainly was seeing stars made me laugh. Not one for half measures or hesitation. I move in and give him 2 more tooth-shattering bashes to the face and a kick to the shin so hard he couldn't even scream. Down he went, but I wasn't done. An example needed to be made. I mounted him like a faking and cooperative donkey and began hammering him all over. Back of the head, back of the neck, and any hard points of bone like the elbow and ribs got a direct strike from the coin rolls themselves. He began screaming, and I began losing it. He managed to throw me off, but that only earned him a kick in the ribs while he was down. Now he was on his back, and I set a knee upon his stomach and gave his front the same treatment his back had received. I beat that kid so badly he went limp, so I beat the fuck out of him some more. By this point, other kids and teachers are starting to approach to try and break it up, so I throw the dime rolls into the forest as hard as I could and give him a nice parting shot to the dick as I'm hauled away. I went away with a 2-week suspension, nearly failed that grade, but managed to pull it out with almost perfect final exams. I never saw Jake again, and I never knew what eventually became of him. I'd like to think all those tooth replacements and facial scars served to remind him never to fuck with anyone ever again. 2/10. Would not recommend. I spent a year in a Waldorf school in Norway. I'm Danish, and in case you didn't know, Danish and Norwegian languages are similar enough for us to understand each other. Anyway, I was mentally and physically bullied by this one dude. We were close to 18 years old, and he bullied me by deliberately calling me names he knew I didn't like. He wouldn't call me by my name, but just refer to me as that Danish girl. He would push me around in gym class, to the point where the teacher would have me do yoga somewhere else. As in, the culprit wasn't excluded, I was. I talked to a classmate about this once. I told her how it hurt to be talked to like that and jerked around. I told her how angry it made me that we were all supposed to be legally adults by now, but he couldn't act like one. She understood and listened. A couple of days after the bully, in a break, when we were alone in the classroom, just the two of us, and I was just sitting there minding my own business, he said the following to me, and I just listened. "Hey, Danish girl. Classmate's name told me you called me immature. She said you called me immature. Don't even try to say you didn't." I had opened my mouth to confirm I had said this. He didn't let me. "If you ever badmouth me to others again, I will know about it, and I will make your life a living hell." And then people started coming back in from break. The next day, I went to the principal and to the main teacher of the class and told them I wanted to change classes. I told them of the bullying that had been going on, and I told them my classmates were in on it since I couldn't talk to them about it without him knowing. The principal told me they would talk to the boys involved and warn them, and that if they ever bothered me again they would be expelled. The next day, 3 boys were called to talk to the principal. 2 of them personally apologized to me and then never bothered me again. They just pretended I didn't exist, which was better than being bullied. The third, the living hell, dude, didn't talk to me or bother me for a week and then went back to the same behavior. I went to the principal, he got another warning. Another 2 weeks, another warning. When I went the third time I was told they wouldn't expel him because the end of the year was so close. I told them that, since they had warned him, they should follow through and expel him, since he apparently thought his actions wouldn't have consequences, and he should be taught that. When they still didn't expel him, I moved back home. I left the class my ML and my MSN Messenger. About a month later, the boy I had a crush on from that class added me on Messenger, and I of course accepted. Turned out it was my bully, now calling me a hoe, going on and on about how he won the fight, and then logging off. I sent him an email a couple of days later, explaining in detail how I left because of problems at home with my parents, and how I was needed to take care of my mentally ill father. It wasn't a lie, I just left out anything having to do with the bullying. I ended the email stating I didn't have anything against him, and that I hoped he would find his way well in life. I never got a reply. But I don't really care. To me, he wasn't the real villain. TLDR, dude bullied me for a year, classmates in on it, left the class. Got my ultimate revenge by forgiving him in an email. I got addicted to violence. Once I started fighting back against the bullies, I found a well of power that I hadn't previously known. I was only 6, but I'd been bullied all through kindergarten because I was extremely awkward and shy. I flipped out and had rage strength, so I could take on 3 or 4 kids at once. The other kids would cry and scream and call the teachers over, claiming I started it. I would get in trouble. I learned that authority figures are not to be trusted. My only power was in violence, and the other kids were going to claim I started the fight anyway, so I may as well just go around starting fights indiscriminately. I got expelled from my private school in 1st grade. Went to public school and got in fights about once a week. Got suspended every so often. In 5th grade, my best friend shunned me and started making fun of me, so I stabbed him in the face with a pencil. Nearly got expelled again for that. In 6th grade, the bullies stopped using physical violence and switched to emotional violence. I didn't know how to defend myself against that and became the bullied kid again. I generally carry over a lot of the values I learned from that time. I expect authority figures to persecute the weirdos and outcasts rather than seek justice, which I've generally found to be as true in adult life as it was in childhood. I'm definitely a weirdo outcast, so I have frequent run-ins with authority. I've learned when to bail from a situation before the mobs start stacking the firewood for the pyre. When I feel someone is trying to bully me or take advantage of me, I start getting worked up into a murderous rage. I tend to prefer handling conflicts face to face, because one-on-one, I can at least beat someone to death. If it comes down to it, I'm always able to stop myself from doing anything rash, though, because I've learned that violence generally makes things worse, and because I genuinely hate hurting people. I have the general attitude that it's me against the world, and that in order to survive, I need to predict the movements of potential threats, outsmart them, and ideally turn multiple threats against each other. Once there's a unified front against me, I'm faked, so if I sense that's about to happen, I'll sow a little chaos, turn people against each other, and get the fuck out before things get bad. My bully began bullying me when I was 5. My best friend was his little brother. Mark, the bully, was 4 years older than me. He would hit me, chase me, throw things at me, taunt me, squish bugs and call them by my name while doing so, those kinds of things. He was a large kid, and my strategy was to avoid him. I survived my childhood and moved away in 7th grade. Years later, while laboring toward my doctorate, after having been very athletic for many years, surfing, skateboarding, weightlifting and the like. I had an opportunity to drive through my old state and neighborhood. I saw my old best friend sitting on the stoop of his house and stopped to reconnect with him. My buddy was happy to see me after so many years and said I should say hello to Mark, who was inside. Seeing Mark was not something I relished, but I figured my size, 6 feet 1 inch, and my athletic build would likely give me a leg up on what I believed would be my final encounter with my bully. Mark was in a lounge chair and stood up to shake my hand when my buddy told him it was me. When he stood, he just kept going up. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall and his biceps were the size of my thighs. Apparently, he had been in prison and had spent his time there bulking up into a pale-skinned version of the Incredible Hulk. He was not threatening, and he was extremely interested in what I was doing in graduate school. I gave him the nuts and bolts description of it. Ultimately, it was clear to me that he considered my academic achievements to have eclipsed him entirely. In short, I beat the shit out of him and never laid a hand on him. 2 scenarios. 1, this bully was always shit talking, but never got physical. I responded with an immature diss, and he came over and choked me until someone broke it up. I continued on about my day. I got home after school hours later and my dad saw the clear handprints on my neck. I was reluctant, but he dragged me into the principal's office and flipped out, showing the bruises. They interviewed one of the other kids that saw it happened, and that kid said I called the bully a bussy. I didn't, but it doesn't matter, so I got 3 days detention, and he got 1 week detention. Another instance, there was this group of popular kids that were always cool with me individually, but in a group they picked on me. One day after school rehearsing for a mandatory play, there were no teachers around, and we were in the gym. The kid pushes me, and jokingly the two start bumping chests with me. I laugh. Then they did it again. I said alright, enough. One of the kids stopped, and the other got mad and really pushed me. I said do it again, and I'm hitting you for real. He did it again, and I punched him the face, then got him in a headlock, and threw him to the ground. I was on top in full mount with my fist cocked, and I'm screamed something like you motherfucker stop, and the other kid was begging me to let him go. I just got up and walked away. In hindsight, I should have wailed on him. The following few days the second kid kept saying to me, man, I didn't think you would actually hit him, and kinds of praise. By the next week they were back to their shit talking and told everyone they beat my ass. I'm obviously not the bully type, so whenever they would say it I just laughed and would say stuff like, let's go, have you beat my ass again. They never made another move, but still never stopped shit talking. This kid had problems. He was a rich kid, but his dad died. One day I was sitting in my car after school waiting for my brother and he just got in the car. I started it, and the kid ran up and across the hood of my car. We both jumped out, and I went to grab him, and he saw my brother, a year younger, but bigger and on the varsity wrestling team, and he backed away saying chill chill chill. He was so scared he didn't try anything else stupid like that with me. Years later I just came back from Iraq, and I was jacked from working out all the time, and I banged his hot girlfriend fat buddy for a week while on R&R. She did all kinds of dirty stuff too. He called me, called her phone, and told her to hand it to me, threatening to fight, and I gave him my address and told him to bring all of his friends. He never showed up, and I never heard from him again. After about a year, my dad found out that I was being bullied and that the school had failed to do anything about it. So he gave me a very simple piece of advice. Next time he tries anything, tell him he's got 3 strikes, and that was his first. If he does it again, don't give him a second warning or a strike 2, just clock him. I did this during a class. Rather than punch him though, I grabbed his arm and used it to lever his head into the table. He was sat next to me, then pulled it back until it was about to come out of its socket. The shock of not only the fact that I could hurt him, I was physically much bigger than him, but that I would do so unpredictably, meant that he left me alone from then on. A couple of years later I found myself being the only foreign kid in a fairly rough school in France. The school bully / joke was famously stupid, but he was the only kid in the year to have been all the way through puberty. He had been held back for 2 years for bad grades, so was 15 when the rest of the year was 13. He thought it would be a good idea to pick on me in the playground in front of a crowd. Now, I wasn't as big as him, but again, I found myself bigger than most of the Frenches. Why were they all stunted? Also, by this point I'd taken a couple of years of judo. He threatened me, and I told him to lay off, because I knew judo. He mocked me, and started doing fake karate chops, and what have you, and dared me to use some judo on him. So I did, and laid him flat on his back. Most of the kids gathered round had a laugh, which he didn't like, so a few days later he collared me in a slightly darker, quieter part of the playground with a couple of his cronies, and said he was going to kick my ass. Almost before the sentence had left his mouth, I brought my right foot straight up into his plums, and I swear I felt one of them almost burst against my instep. He dropped to the floor like a sack of sheet, and didn't get up for about 5 minutes from what I heard. He didn't bother me again. Reading that back, it sounds like a scene from a crappy made for TV coming of age film. But that's what happened. I was in 2nd grade, and like most of the stories here, some older kid just took a shining to me. I don't even remember all the things he would do, but it felt relentless. Every day at lunch he'd grab me and pin me up against the wall while I cried for help and nobody did. Why didn't anybody help? Screaming at me or whatever else. I didn't know what to do, so at dinner one night I mentioned it to my family. I remember my dad being super annoyed at my sister, like wondering why she wasn't doing more to look out for her younger brother. She just looked down at her food, in pain, shame and silence. I don't blame her though, she was in the 5th grade and 5th graders had their own shit to deal with. The next day instead of mum picking us up from school, it was dad. Now our community wasn't too widespread, by that I mean, if you went to this primary school, you had to live nearby, so most kids walked home. So dad picks us up and this is already a red flag, because dad never picks us up from school. As we are driving home though, past all the school kids, he slows the fact down and asks me, who is it? Which one of these kids is giving you a hard time? And I'm like, oh god, no dad, no, let's just go home, please don't do this. He's dad though, and dads can be hella persuasive. Who the fuck is it? I see the kid, and he's walking along with his cronies, having a jolly good time. I'm sure he felt like he had a fun and productive day at school. Dad pulls over. Dad gets out of the car. Dad yells his name. All the school kids turn around and realize what's happening. They faking back away from the kid like he's got an illness. Dad walks up to him and just lets loose. You bullying my kid. His arm flies backwards pointing at the car I'm sitting in. All the school kids turn and look at me. I'm dying inside. The bully, his frightened face gazing at me through the car window. I look solemnly back at him. Dad continues, you leave him the fuck alone. You got it? If he comes home and tells me one more story about you, you're dead, kid. You got it? Don't faking touch my son again. Do you understand? The kid whimpered yes tearfully. Dad walked back into the car. I sat there stunned. At the time, I hated him for doing that. It was beyond embarrassing. But I never got bullied again by that kid. You probably couldn't get away with doing that today, but it was a bit different in the 90s. I don't hold a lot of affection for my father. He was a deeply flawed person, and without getting too deep into his failures of being a father, I just want to add that recalling this memory for the first time in many years, and now that he's passed away, I can appreciate that he cared. He wasn't capable of showing it like in the movies or shows that have perfect awesome fathers. But dude cared enough to do this retarded thing to stop his kid from being bullied. During 6th grade I was somewhere in the middle as far as popularity goes. Was going through puberty fast. I was a damn good specimen, like 150 pounds 5ft6 mostly muscle, abs kind of showing. Was working out like crazy the summer prior. Was a pretty quiet and humble guy, but some kid that was like 100 to 110 pounds, that was probably the most popular guy in our grade, would always make excuses while talking light shit about me because I was always on top by a long shot when it came to anything physical in gym class. Well, one day he took his shit talking to the next level and was actually saying it to my face, telling me things like, OHH, you think you're the shit, blah blah blah. I was pretty much just ignoring him and laughing him off till he pushed me. I told him to chill and that I didn't want to hurt him. Before I could finish my sentence properly, he tried to push me again, and I didn't budge an inch, and he threw a punch at my chest while he yelled out, "Shut up bitch, you're not gonna do shit." I snapped, pushed him like 6 feet back with both feet in the air, and he landed weird and broke his hand and got his air knocked out of him. I thought he was dying or something, the way he couldn't talk or breath right for a bit. After he caught his breath, he was crying like there was no tomorrow. I was almost expelled, was suspended for 5 days. The school was in such a panic they called the cops on my ass because they didn't know how to handle the situation. I don't think I would have been charged with a crime either way, but what saved me from being expelled was that a handful of kids spoke up for me and confirmed the kid was asking for it. The school made me attend this weird makeshift anger management class every Saturday morning for a few months. I have 3 stories related to this. When I was in 2nd grade, I was bullied on the bus and called all sorts of names. One day I had enough and yelled at them, told them how mean they were and how I wasn't going to put up with it. From now on you won't call me those names. You'll call me Super Caleb. I immediately knew I made a mistake and regretted my choice. They laughed, but they stopped. The bus driver might have had a word with them when me rant caught his attention. One of them became kinder and actually called me Super Caleb, but stopped when I admitted how silly that was and how it was fine just to call me Caleb. In high school, about sophomore junior year, there was this kid who was the ugliest and stupidest person I have ever met. He got a messed up face from riding a dirt bike at night without a headlight or helmet, trying to run from the police, who rode dirt bikes with headlights, and crashing through a barbed wire fence. His disfigured face was then used against anyone who tried to fight back. He would sexually harass the girls I hung out with, and when we tried to tell him to shove off, he and his gang of idiots would try to start a fight. When we called over to a teacher, he would claim we were making fun of his face and make us into the villain. The shit he got away with was infuriating. We got really close to blows multiple times, but my vampire friend, another story for another time, did some digging and found out 2 helpful facts. First, the school had a way to get restraining orders against other students. Second, this ugly imbecile's own mother was the person who you went to for the paperwork for the restraining order. It was a risky move, but it ended up working out. My friend was asked the reason for the restraining order, and he went into detail about all the crap the kid was pulling, including getting handsy with our girlfriends. The mother helped file the paperwork and promised to also have a word with her son about his behavior. The next day the kid and his group had their tails between their legs and avoided us like the plague. The group had a few encounters with him after that, but we would just quietly mention his mother and he would back off. My senior year was spent in a different high school. I ended up going to the worst school in the worst city in the worst state for education. Kids were on their 6th year of high school. Dropout rate was high. There were fights everywhere. This one kid heard we had moved from East LA. I didn't, but my brother actually did, and decided to see how gangster we were. Badmouthed us, nearly killed me when he shook a 20-foot ladder I was on the top of. Stagecraft class where I was putting up some scenery, tried to start shit, and got angry when we didn't let it provoke us. I told him to fuck off, and that he was just a loser and a poser not worth my time. He told me he was going to kick my ass as soon as I walked out of class. I already had permission to stay late to finish setting up the scenery I was working on, so I just told him to F.K. off again, and went back to work. I noticed he wasn't outside when I walked out, and noticed that he didn't show up to class the next day either. Turns out he had pissed off someone else, and they were waiting for him to walk out of the class that day. The kid got jumped, messed up, and then expelled because it was his 3rd strike. I got bullied by a fair few people, mostly just general insults I could brush off here or there, nothing violent. But grade 9 year, I had 2 incidents that just kind of set me off. One incident, this kid in a tech class kept harassing me. We were learning about resistors, building circuit boards, and it was my favorite class because we were planning to build a FM transmitter, and I was keenly interested in that. This kid, can't remember his name for the life of me, sat beside me and kept poking me. Something juvenile but incessant. Over the next few weeks I kept getting more and more frustrated and did all the right things like telling the teacher, asking him to stop, yada yada. Finally I just took a cheap Bic pencil, 0.5mm lead, and jammed it right back in his forearm. A nice long prolonged push till he had to move away from me. Got called in mid-science class and was told I was going to be suspended for 2 days. Violence wasn't the answer, should have gone to the vice principal or something, even though I had never interacted with them at that point, let alone actually been in the school office area. Never had an incident before, and teachers and students knew I was generally nice and friendly. Some friends in that class make sure to tell the VP that I had sought help and I was defending myself, and my mom did the angry, "I will call a lawyer because you allowed my son to be tormented for however long." Basically spent an hour in the library for 2 days instead of the tech class, then was allowed back in. More the illusion of punishment than anything else. Looking back on it, my mom was probably intimidating enough that the VP decided it wasn't worth it to stick with the full suspension, especially considering I was low risk of being a troublemaker in the future. Was kind of worth it. Gave me the confidence to deal with the more annoying gang of bullies who had been picking on me, and when they flicked something at me, I charged them instead of ignoring them. I got left alone after that. Moral of the story, always stand up to bullies. Tormented 4 years since elementary, it all stopped after I showed I was consistently willing to stand up for myself. When you are passive about your own defense, you are an easy target, because all the bully wants is that sense of power when they see you feel tormented and need to get help, even if they aren't brave enough to go after you with a teacher watching. Moment you stand up for yourself, you aren't satisfying to pick on, and they have to work harder to get the same thrill. Since my bully is a grown man, my father, it's a lot more financially. He has always been physically and mentally abusive, manipulating and the sort. My mom died when I was 10, hit by a drunk driver, so my dad became the sole parent. Ever since she died, I've been back and forth on Stockholm Syndrome and wanting to run away or wishing he would just die. I always told myself all I had to do was bide my time. I came into some money when I was 18 due to my mum's insurance. My father coerced me into buying a house, telling me he'd fix it up. He's a self-employed carpenter. I could rent it out and live wherever I wanted. Sounded good to me. So I buy it, but then there's this thing called taxes that I couldn't pay. I was a full-time college student and working as a waitress part-time. Not only was my father constantly calling me, harassing me for money to put into this house, he never fixes anything. About 2 years go by, the house sits there, and I'm living in it when I'm home from college with no heat. It beat the alternative of living with my father and his girlfriend at the time and her twin daughters who, for whatever reason, hated me. Well, after 2 years, if you don't pay your taxes in New York they can auction your house. I panicked, called my dad, and told him I wanted to sell it. He doesn't say much, but the next thing I know, my taxes are suddenly paid. I found out later he borrowed money from my aunts. Still doesn't fix the house until his girlfriend dumps his sorry ass for cheating on her, 4 years. So now he's sulking in my house. Him and his girlfriend reconcile a bit, so he redoes his whole room. Not much else has changed. My older sister asks me if she could rent it and we agree. There's a reason they say not to rent to family. We set a very low price on rent, then she changes the lease agreement and tells me she'll pay $100 less. I tell her no, she doesn't like it. I evict her and then evict my dad. He's bringing handwritten receipts saying I owe him money and puts a mechanic's lien on my house for $35,000. He got someone to say I was legally served in New York, even though I was living in Co. and could prove it. I had to spend upwards of $2,500 proving I was innocent, and I still am. When we went to court, he told the judge I was a pothead. He had a picture of me holding an empty elephant bowl, tried to run me, and some cops over, punched my brother in the face for siding with me, and stole my mother's ashes. He then sold everything in my house including my Schecter Diamond series and other nostalgic things I'll never get back. And he completely demolished my house. Gutted it and everything. TLDR, my dad has been my bully my whole life and it's cost me over $2,500, my mother's ashes, my house and memorabilia to fight him. I was an odd kid at school, in that I could fit in several groups, quiet, read sci-fi/fantasy novels, good at science, overweight and not great at sports, but coordinated enough not to be a complete screw up. I also did a lot of outdoor stuff, camping/hunting/shooting. Had a few good friends who had links into other groups, so I kind of sat in the middle of a wide spread of the school population. Not really popular, but no enemies either. In year 11th one guy decided I would be his target for the year. He was a wiry little bastard who came up to my shoulder, but he was also on the first 15th rugby team and popular with some of the pet teachers. This was a boys only Catholic school with a strong rugby culture and he figured that combination would make him retaliation proof. Most of it was petty crap I could let slide, but mid-year it started to escalate to more physical stuff. Unknown to him, I had been doing some weight training with a friend for another activity, and under my flab had a fair bit of muscle hidden away. From memory I could press around 150 kg/330 pounds. One day in the corridors he smacked me on the side of the head, and I had had enough. Grabbed his shirt at the collar and waist, pivoted on my left leg, and slammed him into a bank of lockers. The lockers had lots of protruding metal latches and padlocks, so it had to have hurt a lot. Not much happened after that. There had been a lot of witnesses, so word spread fast, and he left me alone. I later heard that he tried to beach me out to the rugby coach, but that teacher had already heard what happened from some of the other team members, and just told him to suck it up and learn his lesson. TLDR, punched a girl who had bullied me for years over a cookie, got a homework sheet. She ended up with an ice and a broken nose. There was this one girl in my class, Mary, and we could never see eye to eye. Ever. She criticized my coloring. We were 3, tripped me multiple times. When I walked by her desk, we were 6 and her mom was the teacher, so she didn't care. Whacked me with the badminton racket in gym class when we were 9 and no one was looking. You get the picture. I mostly ignored her, but it all came to a head when she tried to take my cookies at lunch when we were 10. You see, Mary had taken up a habit as a popular girl that involved mooching lunch from everyone. She'd take a bag of chips from one person, a sandwich from another, an apple from another, etc. and after every time, she'd say, "You weren't gonna eat this anyway, were you?" and scamper off. No one particularly cared, cause she was pretty and sporty and her mom might actually murder you if you talked bad about her sweet little demon muffin of a child. The one mistake that she made, however, was targeting me. She mostly avoided my lunches, since she didn't like mayonnaise, cheese, and mayonnaise sandwiches were my small self's life. Okay, but one particular day, I brought something extra for dessert, molasses cookies. If y'all haven't tried soft molasses cookies, they're the best thing on the planet and you're missing out. Seriously. Anyway, my mom and I had made some the night before, and I got to take some to school with me for lunch. Mary wanted them, honestly, who wouldn't? And she tried the same tactic that got her everything else she always wanted. Here's the catch, though. She wasn't expecting the skinny, freckled girl to punch her in the face over a cookie. I ended up breaking her nose, and when asked what happened, I said that she tried to steal from me. I didn't mention what, but my school took stealing very seriously, so I got sent home with a homework sheet about why it isn't nice to hit people, and Mary got an ice. We still hated each other's guts, but she never went past words after that. That was long, but also very therapeutic. Yikes. Oh, I can answer this one. After 7th grade my school closed, and I went to a public school for 8th grade. Well, November rolls around, and I have a solid number of friends mostly because I was friends with a guy in my neighborhood that went to the school. There's one guy that was on my bus that was a massive dick. He was the pure embodiment of a white gangster. He wore black shirts, gold chains, shorts and pants low, and he talked a lot of tough talk. I never had any run-ins since we had different bus stops, although his was close, and different classes. Well, one day we're all on the bus, and I'm with a friend, who was kind of a shitty person, and out of nowhere something hits my arm and I feel a bunch of stuff sort of splatter on me. I look down, and there's taco sauce all over my arm with the packet on my seat. Well, I get pissed, and try to find out who did it. Eventually it turns out it was the white gangster. Well, since I was new, and I thought he was trying to mess with me, I decided that I'd tell him to go fuck himself. More words were exchanged, and eventually he mentioned something about how he could knock me out in one punch. Here's the thing, my dad made me take MMA classes and self-defense type stuff for a few months before this, so when he said that I laughed and said, "Yay, faking right, I'd like to see you try." So he tells me to get off at his stop. I say, "Fuck you, get off at mine." He agrees. He walks over to this field and we are both standing there waiting for some reason. I find out that we are waiting for some of his friends cause they wanted to watch. Now I'm already nervous. My adrenaline was going at maximum since I had never been in a real fight before. When I heard that, I thought I was gonna get jumped. So I say something like, "Why does dickhead need people to back him up? They swear they are just going to watch, not get involved." So the fight goes on. I ended up winning pretty easily, and he pretty much didn't touch me. It was quite obvious he had no clue what he was doing. He held his fists like the mascot of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I ended up breaking my head on his head, which sucked, but I didn't really get in any trouble otherwise. The school had no clue about it, and my parents didn't punish me at all. They weren't happy about it, but they didn't give me any grief. I became sort of a celebrity at school for like a short while. Some of his friends came up to me and said that it was a really fun fight to watch. Someone recorded it, but I never got to see the recording. Each time I got faking suspended, my sister's ex would be stalking her and even showing up to our building and just sit there parking in our apartment parking lot. We knew this because her friends would come over and they would be surprised that he's there and would even talk to him. The people that saw him there were all different people. And his sister never liked mine for no reason. This dude, who was a junior in high school, was getting beached and controlled by his little sister who was a freshman. Her friends would randomly try to harass my sister and even her friends that had nothing to do with it. If I was there, I would have done something. And then the day finally came. They thought I was my sister. We are fraternal twins. This tiny little bitch and her preppier's little friends tried calling me by her name. And they tried starting shit until they realized that I was pissed the fuck off and started walking towards them, cursing and causing a scene, and I threatened to beat someone's ass. They were all tiny as fuck compared to me. And obviously they have never been confronted or been in a fight before, so they actually all run away. And I haven't done anything yet. These little girls in heels were almost falling over trying to get away from me. I was barely doing shit. Until there was this one girl left who was the closest friend to the guy's sister, and she was begging me not to hit her and not to do anything to her. She genuinely seemed scared. I wasn't gonna do shit, but this random dude and my friend broke it up since they thought I was bullying her. I eventually messaged my sister's ex's sister on Facebook saying that if she bothers my sister and her friends again, that I would beat her ass. She takes a screenshot and sends it to the school. I get called in and I tell the school how my sister's ex was stalking her and how multiple different people would come across him outside of our building. And we are one of the only few young people living there. So he doesn't know anyone else there besides my sister that lives in our apartment. But the school said that people lie and that if we don't have video proof then it's not true. I got in school suspension. Second time was when this girl was mad salty that I wasn't talking to her. I haven't spoken to her in months. So she was starting all this shit. And we eventually agreed to meet up and talk, which resulted in an argument. And as I was done and walking away, I didn't want to get suspended for hitting her. She jumps me from behind and starts attacking me. And I try pushing her off of me. And as soon as it was over and I was on the ground, she runs into the school and lies to them that I hit her first. Although they have proof that I didn't do anything, they still suspended me for being involved, and I got out of school suspension. Once I tried to say something back to someone, but I missed the teacher telling everyone to be quiet, so I got lunch detention while he got off scot-free. However, very recently I found myself in a different situation. There was a girl I made friends with in kindergarten, and the school we went to was K8, so we were there for 9 years. Unfortunately, after like second grade she joined a clique of these girls who hated me specifically for some reason I still don't know, and although she wasn't the one who started the bullying, oh man was she the absolute upfront and cruelest about it. I endured this for the remainder of my time at that school, and then we went to different high schools. so I was emancipated from her awfulness. Our town wasn't the biggest, so I would hear some news about her sometimes and it always sounded like her life kinda began going downhill after that. I won't go into details, but I heard a rumor that nobody showed up to her high school graduation party. Yikes. But honestly, whatever. I've moved on, and I'm not the same person who I was in middle school, especially considering I'm an adult now. Here's the thing though, there's this huge pharmaceutical manufacturer in my town, which employs a lot of people there, and every summer they hold a lottery to see which 15 workers' kids will get summer jobs there. Last year I got one for the second year in a row, so I went to start working. My department didn't have a desk for me, so a workspace was made up for me in our office right next to the conference room. I actually signed up for it while sitting there, haha. Every couple of weeks or so there would be groups of 7 to 10 new hires going in there with one of our people to get through their paperwork, and what to my wondering eyes should appear but the very girl who bullied me so mercilessly in middle school. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, but lo and behold the weekly newsletter showed a picture of all of the new hires with their names underneath, so there was no mistaking that it was, indeed, her. Now, I have changed significantly over the years and I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because who would even want to be the same person they were at 14 years old? I'm an adult and most adults I know do not care to continue to be as mature as their childhood selves. It wasn't like I was going to be seeing much of her anyway, being that we worked in different departments. I brushed it off and just went about my work as my time there was nearing its end, anyway. So one Wednesday, after I got off work I went to go hang out with my best friend, just as we like to do. She was hungry, so we went to one of her favorite restaurants. Just like that shortly after we were seated the bully girl and her family also decide to have a meal there and are seated in the booth right behind my friend. Almost immediately the bully girl launches into a tirade, talking shit about one of the nice women in our office. Like honestly, the nerve. She hadn't changed a bit. What a gal. I pity her. But I'm also rather bitter, and seeing as it is my last week, and it is unlikely that there will be consequences, I go to the very woman she was complaining about with a grievance about bully girl, leaving out our history and just who exactly she had been complaining about. Our lady decides to call her in, and have her explain her behavior, and she would have to say it right to the face of the woman she was insulting. I feel that this is poetic justice. As for me, I just packed my things at the end of the day and left for the summer, off to continue my senior year at my university in the big city. This is super long, but hopefully worth reading. Well, it depends. Which one? Keep in mind I probably caused half of it. I ended up in the air once when I stood up to this Fico kid in junior high. He ended up slamming my head into pretty much everything and shocking me. I was fine. It still hurt a lot. And I got suspended. The thing that pisses me off about that one is that I went to our teacher about moving seats because he was physically and verbally attacking me all class. The piece of shit teacher kind of made me lose all trust for asking adults for help, and I was just starting to trust again when he said, "No, you guys need to learn to get along." I never did anything or said anything mildly mean to him. One of the few I can say it about. He was just a bully. And I would have died if a classmate, a wrestler, hadn't pulled him off. If any teacher that has ever pulled that shitty learn to get along line, know that you may be putting their life in danger because you don't want to deal with it. I'm a teacher's assistant and I deal with trying to help students who aren't getting along every day. I get it, not easy, but I will never use that faking line. They came to you for help, and they trust you. Don't fuck it up, or you will be forever known by that one line. If one of my kids is ever told that line, I will do my very best to get you fired. I don't want you in charge of my child. Back on topic. And a less emotional story. Another one was a back and forth bullying. We got in tons of fights, but we never got caught. Eventually he tried to bring a friend onto it. He's tried on multiple times in 2 days to knee me in the groin. But when he started following me kicking me, I turned and swung my trumpet case at his head. He ducked, and I caught my case in my office hand, and when he came up I was ready. He made the action movie scream, and held his face as he kicked his feet in pain. I just walked away, but a teacher heard him screaming and came. When he got there he thought the kid hit the pole. The first kid told him, and we got suspended. Later that day I had counseling, and when I told my therapist and my parents, they agreed and didn't have any way out. Best suspension ever. I didn't have trouble with those two again. We even kind of hung out a bit. I guess they figured out how serious it was. Another kid wasn't really targeting me, but had the "I'm so much better than you, you should worship me" attitude and let me know it. I had band class with him, and then science right after, an hour and a half of his crap every day got old. So, while waiting for the teacher to arrive I was getting pissed. I warned him, "If you keep talking I will punch you in the face." His response? "Do it." And I did, and we repeated. I pushed him at least 3 times before he reacted. We both got suspended. And it sucked. All of them were friends, sort of. One day I heard that the kid from the first story had slit the last kid's wrist on art class with an X-Acto knife. He went to juvie. I was so glad he was out of that school. I do feel sorry for him now. I also found out that his home life was a nightmare. I now hope he got the help he needed. No kid should have to go through that. I didn't really start trusting adults until my junior year. I had some amazing teachers who practically bent over backwards to help me. I owe them a lot. I repaired my relationship with my mom, and when I had a teacher whose classroom decor would have set me back years because of another issue. She kinda went mother bear on the school until they changed my schedule. The consequences are many. A lot of time missed in school. Some kids I stood up to became my friends. I have some PTSD when someone touches anywhere near my throat. As I mentioned, I'm now a tar, and my summer job is working at a scout camp with mostly kids about the same age I was when these stories happened. I'm very careful when dealing with bullying, and anytime a kid asks me for help, it is rarely easy to help, but it is worth it. Every second it takes. I've learned what works, and what probably won't work. Fighting probably won't. If anyone read this that is being bullied, don't give up. Keep trying to get help. There will be someone who will help you, just keep going. By the way, I don't usually swear, let alone type out curses, but there is no language strong enough to get my point across. When I went from primary school, single class, all the boys friends, to an all boys secondary school, 4 separate classes, only knew 3 guys in the whole school. The first year a lot of kids tried to establish dominance by picking on other kids. Every time I got picked on I fought back. One time this was me with an improvised flail, backpack full of heavy books, against a crowd of 10 or so guys. A lot easier than it sounds. The last guy decided to throw me out of the lunch queue. I walked back in. He threw me out again. I smashed his head against the wall and jumped on him, beating the shit out of his face. A dinner lady tried to drag me off him. I pushed her away. She tried again, and I punched her in the gut. Only, when I looked up it wasn't the dinner lady. It was the headmistress. Mum got called in. Told if I got in one more fight I would be suspended. Thankfully by that point I had a rep for being mental that kept 90% of the bullies away. One little sheet couldn't leave well enough alone though, and pestered me constantly. I couldn't do anything with teachers watching, and naturally they couldn't give 2 sheets what he was doing. I bumped into him coming out of the, far from the classrooms, toilet one day, and clocked him one, hard. He chose other targets after that point, so yeah, on the whole fighting back worked okay I guess. Not perfect but better than the alternative. So, this is an elementary school story, but hear me out. This kid kept acting like a dick to me, being a general ass, and getting me in trouble for shit I wasn't doing, hitting me and shit, basically humiliating me. After 3 months of this, and telling teachers that he's doing shit but him not getting in any trouble whatsoever, it built up to a point where I literally could not take it anymore. I was and still am one of the nicest people I know. I won't get mad at anyone generally to the point where I'll act. I always keep to myself, but this one time, it got to the point where I did something. So I walked up to him during recess, punched him straight in the nose, kicked him in the balls, grabbed his head, and kicked it with my knee. Of course he's bleeding at this point and I hear the recess emergency siren. A bunch of teachers grab me and rush me off to the standers area. Right after recess ended, I was taken to the principal's office. She started yelling at me, calling me worthless and stuff. A piece of garbage. All these insults I've never heard before, but impacted me pretty badly. She also told me that I'm going to be a failure when I grow up, I'm going to be doing drugs and getting in fights, and the other kid is going to be a great man and be successful. And at this point, they make me sit in this chair at the front entrance where all the visitors see me when they walk in, and a few days later, they made me hold some sign saying something along the lines of I did something stupid or something like that. Eventually my mom was sent to talk to the principal, and to her recollection, she asked why the other kid wasn't punished for all the shit he did, and she told her, well, his parents participate in the PTA. My mother then screamed a bunch of profanities and threw shit in her office, then left. Come to current day, senior year of high school, I haven't used any drugs, haven't drank alcohol. I try to be the nicest person I know, haven't gotten into any fights, am going to college, taking early college classes already, and I'm excited for the future. The other kid on the other hand, he's the kid that jerked it in the library freshman year. He has a kid he can't support, he's a druggie, comes to school drunk as a skunk normally, and pretty positive he's not going to college, but who knows. But this whole fiasco is just one situation that happened at that school. Many more occurred throughout my years there, all of which root back to the fact my parents wasn't in the PTA. To this day, I don't understand why they treated me and my brother like absolute trash for something we couldn't help. I was actually remembering about this. It didn't happen to me, but I knew both guys and was there. So we got this new kid, and I'm using the term kid lightly because he was actually older, who failed to pass his year into our class, and he was super scrawny, kind of a hunchback, and you could tell he had never done a day of sports in his life. He was alone most of the time. Many of his friends had left school, but he was cool, super nerd but a nice guy. I sometimes hung out with him, made an effort to know him, and just didn't want him to spend high school alone. We had our resident tough guy in class, the wannabe rapper, the thug and other things he pretended to be when he was surrounded by people he wanted to impress. So one day a friend, me, and the scrawny kid were walking out of school, and the bully just runs past me and my friend and slams into the kid, making him fly against the door and into the ground. We were stunned because we knew he would occasionally make fun, but never escalated to anything like that. The kid gets up from the floor, he looks the bully in the eye and straight up punches him in the face. It literally seemed like time stopped for a few seconds. The bully swings back and hits him in the face also, and in this moment, before it got out of control, me and my friend stepped in the middle, and I grabbed the bully and took him to the side. We escorted the scrawny kid home, spoke to him the whole way, and made sure he really was okay, like he said he was. It sucks that had to happen, but after I really felt proud for him standing up for himself, being brave enough to face him, although he knew he could get severely hurt. When I was about 13 to 14, I was hanging out with friends, and a boy from school, Steven, who was a few years older than me, started picking on me for no reason. I won't say bullying, but certainly just trying to intimidate me. I don't understand why, but he really just didn't like me. It had gone on for a couple of weeks, and I had argued back, but he always tried to start shit. At the time, a cable company in the UK, called NTL, had started digging the street up, laying the cable. When they were digging up the roads, they put down the long plastic barriers to prevent people falling into the holes. Myself and some friends borrowed about 8 of the barriers and carried them to a grassy patch of spare ground to create a wrestling ring. The guy who had been giving me shit walked by and started on me again, so again I tell him to get faked again. He comes back about an hour later with a group of guys, some who I was actually friends with, and told us they were gonna use our makeshift ring for boxing. They had gloves with them and everything. My 2 friends start walking away, but I'm like, fuck that, we carried this shit here, it's our ring. He throws a pair of the gloves at me and told me if I wanted to stay I'd have to fight. What he didn't know is that I had been learning to box for about a year. One of the guys he was with, David, told him to cut his shit and to leave me alone. He also knew that I actually knew how to box, but didn't bring it up. Anyway, the dickhead insisted, and I assume, because he was older and taller, he thought it would be easy. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Anyone who has done any boxing before and then has been in a fist fight will understand what I mean when I say he was so uncoordinated and slow. He was lunging forward wildly and missing whilst just eating small jabs from me. After toying with him for about a minute I could tell he was already getting tired. The guys at the side called it as round 1 over and David told him to give it up, but he was so angry that I had embarrassed him that he wanted to keep going. He was so out of breath. We start again, and as he comes forward and I shoot in really fast and I crack him right in the nose with the right cross. He stood there looking in shock as the blood started coming out. It was almost a disbelief that I gained the ground and hit him. He walked away and never said a word to me again. I'm still friends with David. He told me died in a car crash about 6 years ago. For background, I've always been made fun of, especially by this one group of girls. The bully in this story is one of the popular girls. So last year, I was in PE class and we were playing baseball. The teacher picked the teams, and I ended up with her as one of my teammates. So my turn came, but the other team got me out, so I walked to the bleachers, and she starts yelling at me for not getting the team a point. So I told her that calm down, it's just a game. This isn't the World Cup. It's not the end of the world. Nobody's gonna die if I lose the team a point. And she said in this really dramatic whinny tone that okay yeah I'll die right now, and I shrugged, gave her a smug smile, and said to be honest I would not care if you did, and walked away with a sheet-eating grin on my face to my friend whose jaw had hit the floor. We heard the bully's friend say ouch, and I then told my friend, loudly enough so the bully could hear, that she's not important to me, never was important, and so why the hell should I care what she thought? That she was just another random stranger in my life with no meaning to me whatsoever. Word must have spread out, because no one bothered me after that, and when they did, I always had some witty response. I eventually earned a reputation as someone who should not be pissed off. It was nice, and my friend, who was a pushover that everyone treated like a slave, started getting witty too. We now roast the crap out of each other unexpectedly, and at any given time.